killed Gary. They killed Gary.
I still can see it when I close my eyes.
This windshield pops off the car and goes how many feet?
400 feet. I'm the killer. I got my gym bag, which fits in the country club scenario. Open the door, put it down, close the door. I walk away.
It is one of the most notorious murders in Tucson history.
He was a wonderful father. He was a true gentleman and a true kind person.
They rubbed shoulders with people in high society.
Everybody thought car bombing has to be a mob hit. Very spectacular. We're sending a message.
Turns out, according to some, who didn't want him dead? A long list of persons of interest, an ex-girlfriend, an ex-wife, ex-business associates.
It was pure obsession. His hatred was pure obsession.
And we're going to reenact the bombing.
Everybody's under.
To see how it could have been done.
2, 1.
Now we're starting to pick up some heavy components.
That you can take what seems like a scene of classic chaos and create any kind of order out of it is remarkable to us. So what specifically did you find as you looked at all that evidence?
And it was titled To Kill. And right at the top of the list was Gary Triano.
Welcome to Tucson, Arizona, or even on a sweet golf course like this one. The triple-digit temperatures and the blue skies above can transform in an instant.
La Paloma Country Club is nestled in the Tucson foothills. It's absolutely beautiful.
You can see the city, you can see the mountains. It's Jack Nicklaus Golf Course.
Typical Friday, very busy golf day. Wednesdays and Fridays were gambler days. And so about 5:15, 5:20, I was standing at the bar, and all of a sudden there was this thunderous boom.
I heard this huge bang, and I rushed over there, tried to see if there's something I could do.
Okay, what's going on there? Okay, there's some kind of an explosion in the country club parking lot. I'm not sure. We have one of the victims has no pulse. They've begun CPR. I guess it's a massive fire. It was some kind of an explosion.
The building shook. I'd never felt anything like that. I immediately turned. I went out to the parking lot, and there was a car on fire, split open like a sardine can.
I found a man still sitting in his seat, no pulse, pale, blood's gone out of him, just white.
Dr. Sam Buttman had come up alongside the car towards me. He looked at me and he said, "Damn, he's dead."
Ken Halligan knew who the dead man behind the wheel of the destroyed car was. He was a longtime member of the country club named Gary Triano.
And there's a member, and he was playing with Gary, and he was sitting on the floor next to his locker, and he was just sobbing. They killed Gary. They killed Gary.
But the question was, who killed Gary? And why would they do it in such a spectacular way? The blast had stopped Gary's gold Movado watch at 5:38 p.m. End of the line for a wheeler dealer who was unafraid to gamble on the golf course, or for that matter, in the business world. And according to his lawyer, Ron Lehman, a man always ready to bet big on himself.
Gary was a tall person who would command a room when he walked in. Dark hair, always had a nice suntan, always had a smile. He was larger than life.
Starting in the 1980s, this former car salesman, he'd sought to take advantage of the population boom in Tucson by getting into real estate and land development and gaming on a Native American reservation.
One of Gary's most successful projects was Indian gaming. You're talking about a high-volume slot machine operation. Gary's personal take was $1 million a month.
Gary Triano was not shy about spending that mega money on the finer things in life. You know, limos, Learjets, even a yacht.
He loved spending $25,000 a week on wine while he was cruising around the Adriatic Sea with his financing partners.
Let's have a look at some of these. This one you were just telling us is very special to your heart.
Well, this picture is because it was on my birthday, 16 days before he died. He was very kind and gracious and generous.
That, too, was Gary Triano, a valued role model and mentor for his niece, Melissa Triano. As her uncle and later her employer, he was a figure of warmth and encouragement for her after a childhood full of hardships. What was it like for you, after all the experiences you've gone through, to really get to know this man and to come to respect the way he went through life?
It changed my life. He was the only person that really believed in me and made me feel like I could, be successful with anything.
He'd had 2 children with his wife, Mary. Gary was a devoted father of his son and daughter, and the couple had become a fixture of Tucson society. That changed after Gary crossed paths with a top-earning real estate go-getter. Her name was Pamela Phillips.
Pamela Phillips was very elegant. She played the part of a socialite. She always looked very put together.
Gary told me that, he met the love of his life, and he was really taken aback by this beautiful, intelligent woman.
And Gary, who is so smitten, the story goes that he calls his wife up, who's on vacation in Europe with their 2 children, and he just announces, I'm leaving you.
Pam was a figure of widespread fascination and could be every bit a life-altering sensation. As much of a merger as a marriage, Gary and Pam were officially power-coupled at a black-tie wedding on a yacht in San Diego. Did you hear that the vows they exchanged included the phrase, for richer or for richer, instead of for richer or poorer?
I think I remember that now that you say that, yeah.
You did hear that?
Yeah.
Gary bought Pam a beautiful diamond ring, which he claimed was worth $250,000. They had twin Jaguars. They had this beautiful home at the base of the Catalina Mountains.
Pam and Gary would have 2 kids of their own, while rubbing shoulders with some powerful peers.
Pam and Gary knew Donald Trump, Marla Maples. Donald and Marla came to a University of Arizona basketball game with Gary and Pam.
He invited Donald Trump out to be his partner at the member guest. And of course, he had to make sure that everybody in the club knew a month before.
So, on that fateful day of November 1st, 1996, Gary Triano was approaching his 53rd birthday with a note of optimism, unaware of the big surprise that awaited him as he stepped off the 18th green. In fact, this invite had gone out to all of Gary's friends, inviting them to a surprise birthday party that was to begin in just a few hours.
Around 4:30, Gary was in the bar with a couple of his buddies at a table. One of the members actually walked up to him and actually said, "Happy birthday." I had no idea it was his birthday.
Gary is walking towards his Lincoln Town car, and he's sliding into the seat, and he sees a blue canvas bag on the passenger seat.
An early birthday gift left in his unlocked car by a friend, perhaps? Gary leans over to unzip the bag and...
The impact of the explosion was incredible. The front windshield flew like 200 feet into the air and landed in the swimming pool.
I'm at home, it's after hours, and I get a call from my sergeant, and basically he says there's been a car explosion at the La Paloma Country Club.
Detective James Gamber was a newly minted detective with the Tucson Sheriff's Department, and he was brand new to homicide. This was his second case.
When he arrived on scene, you could see the victim vehicle. It blew the car doors open, tore the roof off the car. Gary's body is still in the driver's seat.
When Melissa Triano heard there had been some sort of incident with Gary, she immediately rushes over to the country club. So what do you remember feeling as you were running towards the car?
Just panic, just shock. I didn't think it was real. The whole top of the car was gone. I still can see it when I close my eyes.
Immediately, cops were asking who could have wanted to kill Gary in such a spectacular fashion. They would quickly learn a lot of people.
Was it to send the message, don't ever mess with us?
So in the movie Casino, Robert De Niro's character, closely based on the real-life mobster Frank Lefty Rosenthal, climbs into his 1983 Eldorado, turns on the ignition, and is engulfed in a fireball.
A bombing sort of has mafia written all over it. Who would want to detonate a bomb at a posh country club in broad daylight with, over 100 witnesses watching?
Arizona has a past with the mob. In the mid-70s, newspaper reporter Don Bowles, he was investigating organized crime, getting national attention, covered by Walter Cronkite.
Don Bowles is a 47-year-old investigative reporter for the Arizona Republic. He's been working on a series about the mafia.
And when Bowles returned to his car, a remote-controlled bomb exploded under the driver's seat.
Bowles uttered the word mafia as he lay dying, but police were never able to pin his death on organized crime. Strictly speaking, what killed Gary Triano was not a car bomb. It was a pipe bomb on the passenger seat, detonated by remote control. And as Detective James Gamber began looking into Gary's murder, the mob was top of mind.
Everybody thought car bombing has to be a mob hit. Very spectacular. We're sending a message. Don't ever mess with us.
Somebody sent a message, and you don't know if they're coming for you next or if it's the whole family. I didn't know if he was involved with something that might want to hurt us all. You were on guard all the time.
But why would the mob, or anyone else, have it in for Gary Triano? Well, maybe because by the time he was leaving that country club on the first day of November 1996, he was no longer the high-flying millionaire everyone thought he was. In fact, Gary was flat broke.
He owed $4.5 million to 4 casinos in Las Vegas that were supposedly had mob ties.
Gary had owned chunks of undeveloped real estate. He'd invested in a radio station, even financed this misbegotten movie, The Mafu Cage, starring Lee Grant, Carol Kane, Will Geer, and an orangutan.
Isn't he too big for her to handle? No, he's not.
Normally, yes, perhaps, but he's very gentle.
Did you ever see your uncle's movie?
Oh my gosh, yes. In fact, I had a horse once and I named it Mafu. And we joke about it still because that movie was just horrible. It was horrible.
But it wasn't movies like that or real estate that was making Gary rich. It was Native American gambling. He was making millions until he wasn't.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs threw him out of the administration of that contract. Gary personally lost $1 million approximately in monthly income.
So suddenly now he's at a zero income, but his expenses and his lifestyle, continued.
These things were happening during the real estate recession, so things hit the fan at once.
Investigators set their sights on Gary Triano's financial dealings because he owed large sums of money to a lot of people.
There were any number of suspects that the sheriff's department was looking at. There were Chinese investors, there were Mexican investors, there were mafia investors, all of whom Gary purportedly owed money to.
It was a house of cards that was crumbling fast. He was promising investors, collateral on property that he didn't own. He was promising Mexican investors money that he didn't have.
He had that gambler mentality, so he was quite a challenge to manage as a member. I constantly chased him financially. He was very good at tipping, but not very good at paying his bills.
And at one point, Pam got a phone call and picked up the phone and heard on the other line a threat from one of the investors saying, you know, we don't get paid, we're going to kill you. Gary became extremely paranoid, and he starts to sleep with a loaded gun in his bed.
By the 90s, Gary was on the hook for $27 million. He'd run out of time, he'd run out of ideas, and declared bankruptcy.
When Gary ran out of money, his marriage started to disintegrate.
Pam had sort of had enough. She had married this man who was worth millions, and now he wasn't.
So Pam's done, and she files for divorce, and she flees, and she heads off to Aspen with her children.
A bitter divorce and financial ruin left Gary scrambling to stay afloat.
Things were so bad in Gary's life that he went from living in the nicest houses wherever he was around the world to sleeping on a friend's couch.
One of Gary Triano's friends from high school met with Gary Triano the day before he died. Gary was trying to get him and his father to give him a $50,000 loan. His friend described him as anxious and desperate. That loan never happened, and tomorrow never came.
That summit to plummet journey meant it wasn't even his Lincoln Town car that Gary had driven to La Paloma that day. He'd borrowed it from a friend to keep up appearances. And before Gary was even buried, Detective Gamber already had a long list of persons of interest.
We monitor the funeral, as morbid as that may sound. Who shows up, who didn't show up, who wasn't appropriate, who was appropriate. It was a good way to see who should we go talk to.
And Gamber noticed one particularly interesting absence.
Pamela Phillips wasn't at the funeral. She was conspicuously absent. But based on the acrimony and the separation, that didn't really surprise us.
But associates of an eccentric billionaire say he had reasons of his own to want Gary Triano very dead.
He had the capacity and the resources and the henchmen, if you will, to construct the kind of bomb that blew up Gary Triano.
And this doctor claims he saw a kill list written in that man's daily plan.
And it was titled "To Kill," and it was numbered. And right at the top of the list was Gary Triano.
At the Pima County Sheriff's Office, way in the back corner of the impound lot, after 28 years, is Gary Triano's last ride, that 1989 Lincoln Town car. Detective James Gamber showing up close just how devastating that pipe bomb was on that huge mass of Detroit metal.
And this is Gary Triano. This is the car he was driving.
And I know that there's been a lot that's been picked over this, and it's changed over the many years since this crime happened, but you can still see the incredible destruction that took place. This roof is supposed to be flat, essentially, isn't it?
Essentially, right. It should lay right along this line. And you can, if you get a look down here at the frame, you can see where the floorboards have been blown off of the side body panels.
Wow. Just
by the force of that blast downwards.
And the whole arc of this is the result of that bomb also.
Right. Yeah. This, you know, if you looked at this, almost looks like the path of travel of a bullet. Well,
yeah.
Technically it was. It's a projectile, shrapnel.
So everybody knew it was Gary's car. The one thing Gary never did was lock his car.
Lock his car, lock his doors. So I'm the killer.
Right.
I walk up here. I got my duffel bag, my gym bag, which fits in the country club scenario.
Right.
Open the door, put it down, close the door. I walk away.
So finding that killer became Detective Gamber's main goal. There was a monumental list of individuals to go through. But only a few on it were known to have explicit feelings of rage against Gary.
I mean, anytime you have a crime scene this large and this many witnesses, you have to follow every possible lead.
For Detective Jim Gamber, one person with hints of rage was an ex-girlfriend whom he'd broken up with while she was pregnant with his child.
There's a lot of people that talk about how volatile Robin Gardner was.
Robin Gardner was pregnant when Gary left her.
And according to investigators, Robin was so angry, she'd thrown a glass vase at his head.
And this, of course, sent Detective Gamber down another path of like, okay, is this somebody else who might have wanted, Gary dead?
But having met Robin and talked to her, it's like, nah. If it was going to happen, it was going to happen right there. It wasn't going to be, she was going to come back in 6 months and blow his car up.
Even though she was angry at Gary, it was sort of a anger that had dissipated. There wasn't really a reason to investigate her further.
There were a lot of rumors going around about threats that Gary may have received. A lot of the early focus was on people that invested, and then Gary lost the money.
There was no shortage of them to check out. When Gary went bust in May of '94, he left $27 million worth of creditors holding the bag, and that was including those Mexican and Chinese investors. Investigators were able to clear all of them. But there was a man who not only got stiffed by Gary Triano, he got humiliated by Gary too, a Tucson trustafarian named Neil McNeese.
Neil McNeese was, by all accounts, a billionaire by inheritance. He was sort of a trust fund baby, if I could use that term, and he had a lot of money. His own Learjet, I think it was, traveled a lot.
He even had his own personal doctor, Lawrence D'Antonio, accompanying him on his travels.
My job was to keep him alive. He was a terrible drug addict and an alcoholic.
He became acquainted with Gary Triano. They probably frequented the same clubs or things of that nature. And Neil McNeese was somebody who had a lot of money to invest or spend on people.
According to investigators, Gary Triano had approached Neil for $80 grand to invest in him immediately. But McNeese wanted collateral for his $80,000 loan, and newly divorced Gary had just the answer.
So Gary Triano gave Neil McNeese Pam Phillips's supposed diamond ring that Gary represented was worth $250,000.
About 5 days later, he goes to his jeweler who tells him, "You're the proud owner of a ring worth about $7,000. It's a cubic zirconium." And Neil went crazy. Went crazy in the jeweler shop, went absolutely crazy.
And so Neil McNeese did not want to be taken as a fool. And so it was said that he had put Gary on a kill list.
It was titled "To Kill." Right at the top of the list, the day I originally saw it, was Gary Triano. And he never stopped saying, "I'm going to kill Gary Triano," from that day.
And his former associates allege, along with his vast wealth, McNeese also knew the right people, people that had the capacity to make a bomb.
The moment I heard on the newscast on my car radio that the victim was Gary Triano, I absolutely believed 100% that he was assassinated by Neil McNeese.
What we could find out about Neil McNeese is that he was in a lot of loudmouth, but very little follow through. Nothing to connect McNeese to a device. And if he killed Gary, that didn't get him his money back. And he wasn't so financially hit that, he was down to his last dime. So did he do it? Again, not a strong connection.
So little hard evidence pointing to anyone for Detective Gamber. But then, out of the clear blue, Pima County receives a call from an out-of-state detective about an abandoned minivan some 500 miles away in California. It's crammed with stuff that has a name on it. That name is Gary Triano. But why? "800 miles away from the Tucson, Arizona desert, atop the snowy mountains of Colorado, two cases are about to collide, and there's a tantalizing new lead about to emerge thanks to a fraud investigation by Aspen detective James Crowley into a local named Ron Young.
What I was hearing was he had a great, line to get into your business. He was going to do all these great things for you. I'm so awesome, and I'm going to make you a ton of money.
Ron Young was someone who was, even for the mid-90s, fairly adept at computers and establishing an online presence even back then.
He comes to the attention of Detective Crowley after two local businessmen allege that Ron has stolen more than $100,000, and they both want to press charges.
If Ron became your business manager, he would instantly want all the books, access to all the financials, which gave him an opportunity to transfer money out of your bank account to his own bank account, get credit cards issued in his name on your account.
So Crowley gets search and arrest warrants and sets out to pay Ron Young a visit at his place on Snow Bunny Lane.
So this is Snow Bunny Lane, where Ron Young lived at one point. On the corner where the carport was Ron's house. So we get there and he's gone. He's nowhere to be found.
Ron Young is 6'6", maybe 300 pounds. But where is he gone? 6 months later, Detective Crowley gets a call from the cops in Yorba Linda, California.
What happened was that police in California find an abandoned van, and it's a rental van out of Aspen.
Authorities discovered that the abandoned Dodge Caravan was rented by Ron Young. It was parked outside his parents' house.
And it's an unlocked van. And so when police do come and they open the van, they discover some very unusual things inside.
And as Detective Crowley learns, more than one of those things has Gary Triano's name on it.
There's divorce documents between Gary Triano and Pam Phillips. There are maps of Tucson. There are lists of names of associates with Gary Triano.
And they discover something else that's sort of unusual. It's a sawed-off shotgun. I mean, fraud suspects, they're not usually violent.
It was Crowley's first encounter with Gary Triano's name. But he recognized the name Pamela Phillips because earlier that year, she had walked into the Aspen Police Department and accused Ron Young of stealing money from her bank accounts.
In investigating Ron, there were 2 fraud cases initially, and then Pamela had come in to report the 3rd fraud case.
Detective Crowley had an outstanding warrant for Ron Young's arrest. So why did his still-at-large fraud suspect appear to be all up in the business of this Gary Triano from Tucson, Arizona? Then came November 1st, 1996, and the morning after.
I was sitting at my desk in the investigations office and reading the paper and saw the headline.
It was the shocking pipe bomb murder of Gary Triano.
And it kind of, when you get an adrenaline dump and you get that kind of metal taste in your mouth, and that's kind of what it was.
And so Detective Crowley calls Pima County Sheriff's Department.
And I said, here's what I have. You might be interested in this.
And when Pima County gets this call from Detective Crowley, laying out the evidence retrieved from the van, especially those documents with Gary Triano's name on them, they finally have the connection they've been waiting for.
So what was an Aspen fraud case now is firmly interwoven with our homicide case.
Detective Crowley also hands over to detectives in Tucson a notebook from the van. Inside that notebook, a handwritten list of names, including Gary Triano's niece, Melissa.
They brought it to me, and in that notebook was Melissa Triano, license plate Missy. My license plate said Missy on a black Corvette, and that was my car. So he had been following me, and it was terrifying.
But now, no one can find where Ron Young is or get any answers he might have. And so the investigation into the identity of Gary's killer, it stalls for nearly 10 years. Until an expert enters the case who's got decades of experience. And that helps investigators with the identity of Gary's killer from a painstaking reconstruction of the bomb itself.
People think when the explosion occurs, everything goes away.
Well, it doesn't.
Here we are in New Mexico, Anthony.
Yes.
A typical land of enchantment landscape around us here, right? Kind of desolation and
mountain desert area.
So a decade after the murder of Gary Triano, the case has gone stone cold. The Sheriff's Department decides to invite one of ATF's top bomb experts, Anthony May, into the investigation, just to see if he could help determine who built that bomb that wound up in Gary's car. Anthony, when I think of blowing stuff up in New Mexico, I think of the movie Oppenheimer, something in Los Alamos, right?
Yeah, a little bit south there, but yes.
You guys gotta hold on, hold on.
So if you go just outside Socorro, New Mexico, you'll find this 40-square-mile field laboratory, and it's called the Energetic Materials Research and Testing Center, EMERTEC for short. It's a research and training division of New Mexico Tech, and it's a place where highly skilled bomb specialists do their work with explosives. So we're blowing something up today, aren't we?
Yes, we are. We're going to reenact a bombing that occurred in 1996 that ended up taking Gary Triano's life.
Today, Anthony May is going to take us inside his field of explosive expertise and show us just how this kind of detective work can help authorities identify a killer. What kind of car is this that we're looking at right here?
It's a Ford Mercury Grand Marquis. It's not the exact vehicle, but it is similar in body style and chassis.
Melton Flores is a research engineer and assistant director here at EMERTEC. He and his team are the ones who found the car and put together a pipe bomb, all closely resembling Gary Triano's car and what was inside it on the evening of November 1st, 1996.
Will be safely tucked away in the upper bunker. We have a flag that you'll see behind your shoulder there. That flag is currently in the down position, which means that testing is imminent.
The EMERTEC engineers have these high-speed cameras ready to film the explosion at 20,000 frames per second.
Morning, everybody. So today we got a recreation shot of a 1996 bombing in Arizona. It's going to be a pipe bomb. Once the bomb goes off, we're going to wait until for Merkel he'll give it the all clear. It's the desert, it's hot, so drink plenty of water. We got snakes, we got scorpions, we got spiders, so watch out for all that.
Tesla. Yeah, hold on. Let me do a quick roll call up here.
Like with the Triano case, the pipe bomb is placed in a blue canvas bag and it's positioned on the passenger seat. The technician spools out the firing fuse. We take cover in a bunker some 2,000 feet away.
Everybody's undercover?
All right, we're all good here.
Tesla, your range.
Okay, you ready, Tesla? 2, 1.
That sound was amazing.
I think that could have been the back window that was flying out.
Oh, is that right?
Starting to see some smoke now. I think, it's smoldering a little bit.
Yeah, it looks that way.
The car's on fire.
Every bomb scene tells a story, and the debris scattered by this bomb is much like the debris that was scattered after the bomb that exploded in Tucson on November 1st, 1996. Debris gathered up by law enforcement that Anthony May would go on to analyze. So after the all clear, we move in for a closer look.
It would be up, most of it is going to be up over that bridge. Well, we're going to walk into the blast scene. Now we're starting to pick up some heavy components, and now we're going to decide, is it from the car? Is it from the bomb? And what I'm seeing is car parts here, the door handle. As I can see already, The roof of the car is over here. Looking at the roof of the car, most of our fragments went straight up.
Does it matter to you that it went straight up?
It'll tell me the orientation of that pipe bomb.
That you can take what seems like a scene of classic chaos and create any kind of order out of it is remarkable to us.
That's the objective. Take a look at what the crime scene is telling you, what the evidence tells you, and then go from there.
It is one of the most notorious murders in Tucson history. Opening statements.
Back in 2005, it was Anthony May taking the fragments of that 1996 bomb that killed Gary Triano and reassembling the device, hoping that the process would offer some leads in a case that had grown cold.
This is actually a picture of when Jim brought the evidence up to me. It's just kind of like a puzzle now. I am trying to match pieces. This is the pieces of the pipe.
So what specifically did you find as you looked at all that evidence?
People think when the explosion occurs, everything goes away. Well, it doesn't. There's 95 to 99% of the device still there. It's in just different configurations. I was able to determine the size. It was about a 17-inch pipe bomb.
So it took Tony May about a month to piece back together all the fragments of the bomb, and he showed us the reproduction he was able to construct. So somehow from all this material, you're able to recreate something that looks very much like what the actual bomb must have been.
Yes.
Is there any indication that Gary Triano would have seen that bag in the seat next to him?
Well, he in fact did see it. There was a witness that said that he saw Gary Triano get in the car and then lean over into the passenger seat, meaning that the bomber was also somewhere close by with the remote control device, and when he saw him lean over the bag, that's when he initiated the device.
And just like any puzzle, once the pieces start to fit together, there's a picture that emerges that would eliminate some suspects and start to bring others into sharper focus.
We had found a piece in the debris here of parts that were soldered together. There were globs of solder.
The globs instantly told you, not somebody who does this on a regular basis.
Doesn't do it on a regular basis. The question to me was, is this a professional hit? Are we dealing with a mafia? From the design, the construction, the soldering, the battery, I don't see that.
Turns out the outdated 6-volt battery used on the bomb was also a clue about the bomber's age.
That indicated to me that we're not dealing with some young individual who has experience with AA batteries or 9-volt batteries.
That it might have been an amateur building their first bomb, and that the choice of battery was suggesting an older suspect, excluded organized crime, and got authorities focusing on the man with the disorganized van, Ron Young.
So the way the device was built fit Ron's profile. So it's just another brick in the wall kind of thing.
And as investigators continued to build that wall, they are intrigued by the enticing link between Ron Young and Gary's ex, Pam Phillips. Were they more than business partners? And will unearthed audio recordings reveal whether Pam was possibly an accomplice in the murder of her ex-husband Gary Triano, or a victim of Ron Young?
I don't even want to talk about it right now.
If I ever found out that you compromised me, you're, a fried duck.
It's a story about sex, lies, and audio tape, and a sensational bombing.
It was something that absolutely shook Tucson to its core. It was horrific. It was violent.
I'm the killer. I got my gym bag, open the door, put it down, close the door. I walk away.
The ex-wife, the business manager, the murder. How do they all fit together?
Pamela Phillips was a socialite, a beautiful blonde bombshell. She was the quintessential trophy wife.
Why would she have been so mad at him?
Nothing went her way through that whole divorce, and she was furious by it.
And so she's on the hunt for her next husband.
She said, I need to find a husband that is worth $20 million or more.
Finding them would be the real problem.
Is it okay to talk?
Yeah.
copy down what you need to copy in your own code and throw this away.
To this day, I keep calling it the treasure trove of evidence. It was astounding what was there.
If he was a real hitman, why is he not threatening her with her life or threatening her family, her kids?
It's a sensational trial, complete with sex, money, and murder.
It's summed up in one word: greed.
Here in Tucson, Arizona, handsome, self-confident land developer Gary Triano was married to Pamela Phillips, herself a charismatic player in Tucson real estate. They were a power couple with expensive tastes and the assets to satisfy them.
It was almost like the lifestyles of the rich and famous.
But after the real estate boom went bust, Gary went bankrupt.
Pamela began to realize maybe Gary wasn't all that he was cracked up to be. Like maybe there were little cracks in this armor here. Because Gary started to let her in on some things, like he's indebted to multiple people.
Following their divorce, Glam Pam and their 2 kids moved to Aspen.
I saw Gary as being somewhat downtrodden, somewhat sad. Sad he was losing his family, sad he had lost all his earthly riches.
But ever the optimist, Gary felt confident he'd be on top once again soon. Until November 1st, 1996, when a car bomb blew his comeback and his car to smithereens in a parking lot just like this one. But who or what wanted Gary Triano dead? Despite Pam and Gary's bitter divorce, investigators could see no immediate connection between Pam in Colorado and Gary's pipe bomb murder in Arizona, until cops stumbled across that minivan in California belonging to Ron Young, packed with documents with Gary and Pam's names on them.
It was great because we had no association with Pam and the murder until then. Before we had Pam was in Aspen, the bomb went off in Tucson. How could Pam have pushed the button? Okay, now we have that connection. We have Ron Young bridging that distance for us.
Pima County investigators needed to understand the complex relationship between Pam Phillips and Ron Young. According to friends, that relationship had begun here on Aspen Snow Bunny Lane, where Ron Young lived. Pam was practically his next-door neighbor.
And at the time, Snow Bunny Lane in that area was where kind of working people, doctors, lawyers, normal people in Aspen lived.
It was not Pam Phillips' kind of neighborhood, a long way down from that mansion in Arizona. So she asked her neighbor, Ron Young, to help out on her business idea. It was an astrology website called starbabies.com.
If your baby was born under a certain time, you could get their zodiac and all that. It was that type of thing that Pam wanted to do and start up a little business like that. And he helped set that up.
A new-in-town ski instructor who'd gotten a side gig as a live-in nanny for Pam's 2 kids, Kevin McDonald says he saw a lot of Ron Young.
He would come over and spend time with Pam and was helping her with the star babies, and then he would have dinners with her. And I could see that there was more than just being the down the street neighbor. After the kids were asleep, Pam didn't want them to see them being intimate or being more than just friends.
Kevin would recall Pam as a good and caring mother to her kids. But according to Pam's friends, starbabies.com and Ron Young were only part of her plan to return to the top of the mountain here in ski country.
Pam was always out in the different private bars and private clubs in Aspen, trying to meet rich men. And because she said, I need to find a husband that is worth $20 million or more.
If it was Pam's long-term goal, it was fueled by her short-term needs. She was running out of money. And for that, she blamed Gary Triano. Why would she have been so mad at him?
Nothing went her way through that whole divorce, and she was furious by it. And she wanted money. She needed money to continue her lifestyle.
Once Pam and Gary had cruised on luxury yachts and private planes. Now, Pam was steamed that Gary was making her pay to fly the kids back to Aspen after his visit with them.
Pam told me one night after I put the kids to bed, she just said that she was down to her last $60,000. So I knew that she was worried. She was bleeding money. She wasn't making any money.
Pam was convinced that Gary was hiding assets, so allegedly she asked Ron Young to find them.
Pam's chief complaint during this entire relationship is she's not receiving enough child support from Gary, and he must be hiding assets. But Ron is still really pissed off that he's not being paid for his services.
Because of their business relationship, Ron had access to her accounts, and he allegedly started taking out money for himself. That's what led Pam to report Ron's alleged fraud in the first place. Yet it wasn't long after that Ron Young skipped town and vanished. He was one step ahead of an Aspen arrest warrant.
After Pam came in the initial time, and I asked her to provide follow-up documentation, she never came back.
Ron Young is nowhere to be found, but Pima County sheriffs decide to talk with Pam.
And then when you go to interview Pam, she minimizes Ron Young. Oh, he was not involved in my life. He gave me a little financial advice and things like that.
Yet less than a year later, Pam is out of Snow Bunny Lane and into a $1 million home. Why were authorities so interested in her change of fortune?
Pam had 2 million reasons to kill Gary.
Pothole number 3. Allegedly, that's how the twice-divorced Pam Phillips referred to Ron Young, her sometime lover, neighbor, and business associate, in a note she wrote to her aunt.
Ron was not her type. She was used to handsome, charismatic, wealthy men, and Ron was nothing like that.
When Pam moved up to Aspen, she purported not to have any money and was in financial hard times.
There was, however, a $2 million life insurance policy on Gary Triano's life, set up to take care of his 2 kids with Pam.
They were the beneficiaries, with the proviso that if they were under the age of 18, then Pam was the one that would receive the money and appropriately apply it to the children's lives.
Now, even with a friend's assistance, Pam's financial straits were affecting her ability to pay for that policy.
And then we find out that when Pam learned of Gary's death, she was actually almost 30 days in arrear on her premium payment.
Pamela Phillips became hysterical. Not hysterical over Gary's death, but hysterical over the fact that the premium had not been paid for the month of November.
And they rushed a FedEx payment to the insurance company that got there too late. The insurance company, though, honored it anyway.
And 15 days later, Pamela makes a claim on Gary's life.
So it took until January of 1997 before the insurance company paid. Pam got a little over $2 million.
Pam Phillips wastes no time. As soon as she gets this $2 million life insurance proceeds, she goes out and she buys her dream mansion. And it's this home in Meadowood. It has its own ski lift. It's buttressed against the mountains. It's got these like massive wooden doors. It has marble all over the floor.
So as Pam was spending that life insurance money and climbing back into Aspen society, Gary's murder remained unsolved. It was a burden on the entire Triano clan, the notoriety haunting their every move.
If I said my name, I get a million questions or a million comments on the matter. Are you related to Boom Boom Triano? Like horrible things people would say.
They would refer to your uncle as Boom Boom?
Boom Boom Triano was one. There was all kinds of weird things that they said.
So by 2005, this case had really become a cold case.
So we had this one anomaly, Ron Young. And it was, where's Ron Young? Where's Ron Young? Aspen PD had the arrest warrant, so he could be arrested anywhere within U.S. jurisdiction, and just nothing was coming of it. He was like a puff of smoke.
In hopes of teasing Ron Young out of hiding, Detective Gamber uses his network of undercover agents and investigators to approach the TV show America's Most Wanted.
The manhunt for November 19th is now in progress.
Then in 2005, a segment on Ron Young goes on the air.
Could this accused con man also be a cold-blooded killer? Well, cops in Arizona want to find that out.
Right after the America's Most Wanted episode airs, it happens to catch the eye of a chiropractor in Florida whose patient is none other than Ron Young.
So this chiropractor out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, informs America's Most Wanted that not only is his patient Ron Young, but Ron has a scheduled appointment the very next day.
And that's a huge break in the case, because now law enforcement, America's Most Wanted, they can all descend on Florida and make the capture.
Sure enough, Ron Young shows up in time for his appointment.
After his appointment, Ron is returning to his car when Broward County's fugitive unit makes the arrest. All of it captured on America's Most Wanted.
Right behind your back. What's your name? Hey, man. I asked you your name.
Ron Young.
Authorities hold Ron Young on fraud and weapons charges because when Ron's apprehended, he's got a loaded Colt 380 semi-automatic gun in his possession. So now, detectives race to Florida to see what Ron Young might have to say about Pamela Phillips and Gary Triano. But when they touch down, they get a big surprise, one that will blow this case wide open.
We walk over to this box, and there's some micro cassettes sitting in there. And it's like, anybody have a micro cassette recorder? And what was on there is, to this day, I keep calling it the treasure trove of evidence. It was astounding what was there.
I don't even want to talk about it right now.
What I'm saying is if I ever found out that you compromised me for your benefit, it would be really unfortunate for you.
After being featured on the show America's Most Wanted,
Right behind your back.
Ron Young is arrested in Florida.
Hey, man. I asked you your name.
Ron Young.
Crowley, it calls us and says they got him. So they start talking to Ron Young, and Ron says, sure, you can search my apartment. And yeah, you can search the storage locker I have.
He gives them kind of an extraordinary gift. And it's like he's opening up his treasure trove of evidence for law enforcement. And what they discover, is a major break in the case.
Among the physical evidence seized from Ron's properties, detectives find spreadsheets, FedEx receipts, thousands of email printouts, and letters that shockingly reveal Pam and Ron had been in contact the whole time Ron was a fugitive, even after Pam had accused Ron of fraud and minimized their relationship to police. I think the apparent connection between us is best kept at a minimum, she writes. I don't want to appear as too much of a helper, though you know I am. I love you and count on you. Pamela.
So there was obviously more of a relationship than she was letting on.
But then, as far as evidence goes, the coup de grace.
We walk over to this box, and there's some micro cassettes sitting in there. And it's like, anybody have a micro cassette recorder? And so we pop one of the tapes in, we hit play.
You sent my money at my principal.
I am not going to keep sending me more and more money unless I know that you can honor our agreement.
And it's Ron Young's voice and Pam Phillips's voice. We immediately turn the tapes off. We box those up immediately. And those go to the lab to be professionally transferred.
It takes months just for detectives to listen and catalog the dozens of hours of telephone conversations that Ron has secretly recorded. And the contents are stunning.
I'm really happy that your 1.6 was tax-free.
Just say yes. I will take the Ford like it's been coming, and I'd like the balance of it as quick as possible. Yes.
Yes, I want it all. I want it all. I want it all as soon as possible. We have no disagreement.
You start to listen to the phone calls, and the next thing you hear is, you got your 2, I want my 4. Well, you have a $2 million insurance policy, and you have Ron getting $400 and some odd $1,000 in cash from Pam.
Recovered emails and FedEx receipts detail how, at Ron Young's direction, Pam made regular cash payments to him, choreographed, authorities believe, in a manner to avoid detection.
You start following Ron telling Pam, this is how you hide taking the money from your accounts and sending it as cash to me. And he gives her a detailed process to follow.
He was instructing her to take out certain amounts of money at different locations, use different accounts, don't mail from the same place twice, vary your pattern so no one gets wise.
Is it okay to talk?
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing that shows me having any contact since I left Aspen, or ever, really. If you, for any reason, need to keep dates or numbers or anything else, obviously just transpose it into codes.
For investigators, this game of subterfuge and these under-the-radar payments from Pam to Ron is starting to smell like a murder conspiracy.
What he had on his computer was astounding. Pam was paying him on a monthly basis, and he had his own amortization table of the money Pam was paying him with the interest that was due, and it totaled something like $440,000.
Armed with this new evidence, police get a warrant to search Pam's place, the Aspen mansion her slice of the insurance money paid for.
In September of 2006, Pima County Sheriff's Department joined forces with the Aspen Police Department and surround her house, and they knock on the door and they say, we have a search warrant.
Pamela answers the door and they tell her, we have a warrant to search your house, and she said no and closed the door in their face.
Pamela Phillips is completely surprised by this. She tells the police, yeah, my lawyer's on the way, and the detective says, I have a search warrant. So they come in, and the way she describes it is like they're scattering across her marble floors like rats.
While we're executing the search warrant, Pamela decides to leave, and we don't have an arrest warrant for her at that point, so she's free to leave.
She gets into her little Mini Cooper and drives off.
Meanwhile, after pleading guilty to firearms charges, Ron Young is sentenced to 10 months in prison in Florida. After his jail term, he's sent back to Aspen.
He gets extradited to Aspen to face the fraud charges. And it's there that the fraud charges get dismissed. After the charges are dismissed in Aspen, we don't have enough to charge him with the homicide yet. So he is free, but he's on parole from the federal prison.
Ron Young moves to his parents' house in Yorba Linda, California.
So there's all this stuff that's coming together. There's the suspicions about the life insurance policy. And now we've got Ron Young, who's an associate of Pam Phillips, and all these things in the van in California, the names and a notepad of people associated with Gary Triano, maps of Tucson, receipts from a hotel in Tucson near where Gary was living at the time.
After nearly 12 years, the police finally obtained arrest warrants, hoping to bring long-awaited justice in the case of Gary Triano.
We're going to do a simultaneous arrest. We've already put surveillance teams in Aspen, surveillance teams in Yorba Linda. We hit Ron and we arrest him. We go to hit Pam and we do a records check on her, and we find out she flew out of the country to destinations unknown. She was gone.
On Friday, October 17, 2008, cops mount a large-scale operation to simultaneously arrest Ron Young and Pam Phillips for the 1996 murder of her ex, Gary Triano.
We have the arrest warrants. We've already put surveillance teams in Yorba Linda. We've coordinated with local law enforcement. We hit Ron and we arrest him. We extradite him back to Tucson.
But when it comes to arresting Pam, they have a rude awakening.
Pam Phillips, we have every reason to believe, is still living at her house in Aspen. We go to hit Pam and we do a records check on her and we find out she flew out of the country. She was gone.
Pima County investigators named Young and Triano's former wife, Pamela Phillips, as suspects in the case. They're still looking for Phillips and believe she may be out of the country.
So we have to put out a notice with Interpol. So now the United States Marshals Service and the FBI become involved.
Unbeknownst to police, Pam is in Europe, and she's leaning into the alpine lifestyle in a swanky lakeside town in Switzerland called Lugano.
She has just picked up where she left off. She's recreated her world over there. She's hobnobbing with the elite. She's off hunting again for a rich, eligible bachelor. In fact, has been spotted with several.
While out in Lugano, it's just not Pam's style to keep a low profile. And so, sure enough, a local tipster hears news of Pam's murder indictment and picks up the phone.
I'm sitting at my desk, and I get a call. There's a gentleman who'd like to talk to you. He thinks he knows where Pam is. So everybody's poised to go arrest Pam in Lugano, Switzerland.
But there's a hitch. See, the Swiss government wants a guarantee that the U.S. won't invoke the death penalty. Gamber and his team are able to work out the details.
But when the Swiss police went to arrest her, yeah, she wasn't there.
Ultimately, there's a multinational effort that leads to Pam's arrest in Austria. And while she's sitting in a jail cell in Vienna awaiting extradition, back in the States, Ron Young goes on trial.
The trial itself started in March of 2010. We had been doing pretrial litigation for at least a year and a half leading up to that point.
Some of the challenges that the prosecution faced in Ron's trial was that it was a circumstantial evidence case. They didn't have any direct evidence that linked Ron Young to the bomb.
The prosecution acknowledges no one reported seeing Ron in Tucson on or around November 1st, 1996, nor did he have anything in his possession specifically tying him to Arizona or to Gary Triano on the date of his murder. However, the prosecution does have Anthony May.
My job was to determine what was used and build a reconstruction of the device, and then the device was used to present it in court for his prosecution.
He was able to recreate the entire bomb all the way down to the battery purchased from Radio Shack, the remote-controlled air switch used to operate it, to detonate it, and even down to the duffel bag purchased from Walmart. That was an impressive display in front of the jury, I think.
And the prosecution also had those micro cassette tapes.
I helped you on something that was, beyond what anybody else in the world would probably do, and I think that deserves some consideration, since you're living off the benefits of it.
The prosecution makes the case that in their conversations, Pam and Ron were talking about the murder of Gary Triano.
I am not going to keep sending you more and more and more money unless I know that you can honor our agreement.
The prosecution points out to the jury an email that surfaced from Ron to Pam, referring to Gary as an 800-pound monster.
The communication between Ron and Pam was the crux of the case.
The defense countering that Ron was simply extorting money from Pam.
What Ron did, he's not proud of. He's blackmailed Pam.
Then there was also an out-of-the-blue prison witness with a prosecution-perfect account to tell the jury. Andre Mims, a cellmate of Ron Young's when he was in prison for the 2005 gun charges.
He looked me in my face. He said, Andre, I blew that
in his car.
For the prosecution, Ron Young's one statement to Andre Mims, how he blew Gary Triano up, might as well have been a confession.
But the defense claimed this testimony was made up and immediately called for a mistrial. The motion was denied.
I think we felt confident. I mean, as a prosecutor, even on a strong case, you're always concerned about the potential one outlier juror that could lead to a hung jury.
After 13 hours, the jury reached a verdict.
Before the defendant, Ronald Kelly Young, guilty of the offense of first-degree murder.
Ron Young was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
Ron Young is sentenced to life in prison.
We can't tell you how many times we thought we would never see who killed my father.
But for Gary Triano's family, the story is far from over, and justice has not been served yet.
We still need Pam, and there's a long road still with that.
That long road would lead to a fateful night in July 2010. A plane with Pam Phillips on board, making its way from Vienna to an airport in Arizona, where Melissa Triano and Detective Jim Gamber were waiting.
I think her flight came in at midnight, and we stood outside of the airport and watched her come off the plane.
Pam's comment to the U.S. Marshals was, if Gamber's in the airport, I'm not getting off the plane. They walked her out of the jetway, turned her over to me. They had to walk her all the way out to a patrol car.
I wanted her to see our faces and to know that we were never giving up on bringing her to justice.
As Pam prepares to go on trial, her public defender would mount an ambitious murder trial defense.
This will not be a short trial when it starts. Phillips' defense has listed about 100 witnesses.
He's making these threats to embarrass her. He knows that she is in all these newspaper articles.
Could he surprise everyone and get Pam a not guilty verdict? Gary Triano had left his first wife to pursue Pam Phillips. Then, as a Tucson power couple, they lived high on the hog. Now, 17 years after he was killed, Pam Phillips was on trial for Gary's murder.
For anyone who likes a sensational trial, complete with sex, money, and murder, this one was worth the wait. It has it all.
The trial began February 2014. There was a ton of attention and anticipation. All eyes were on Pamela Phillips.
I think it was probably the biggest case we've ever had.
The Aspen socialite on trial for killing her ex-husband with a car bomb. Pamela Phillips maintains her innocence, but prosecutors say they can prove she's a killer.
For the Triano family, this case represents the ultimate hope in finally bringing justice for Gary. How was that trial for you and your family?
It was very difficult to sit through when photos or evidence was going to be shown that would be hard. I would get up and walk out.
What made it imperative that you be there then?
It was knowing the truth.
Prosecutors argued that the main reason that Pamela Phillips orchestrated this murder on her ex-husband was the $2 million life insurance policy.
The bulk of our evidence came from Ron Young, the FedEx receipts, the phone calls, the emails that Ron Young had saved.
With records taken from that abandoned minivan in 1996, prosecutors argue how Ron Young closely surveilled Gary Triano's comings and goings, as well as those of Gary Triano's relatives, which included very specific details about Melissa Triano, who took the stand.
The last line has your name on it again, correct?
Yes.
Melissa Triano. Just above your name, what does it say there?
Corvette convertible niece.
The prosecution then brings out a key witness, Laura Chapman, a former friend of Pam's, who recalls a conversation she says she had with Pam before Gary's death.
She said that she should just hire a hitman, have him taken out, and that the insurance policy was a $2 million insurance policy. And she said it would just be really easy to do because he was so predictable, because he played golf every day.
The defense claimed Laura's memory was faulty. and that Pam was not desperate for the life insurance money because she'd lapsed on that last premium payment.
If you're going to do a murder for hire for the insurance money, aren't you going to be sure that the insurance policy is in place and has been paid?
But for the prosecution, big piece of the puzzle were those taped phone conversations between Ron and Pam, discussing Ron's alleged $400,000 cut of that life insurance policy, where, in the view of the prosecution, Ron says the quiet part out loud.
Right now, I want to know that we are capping it at 4. I don't want this nebulous thing out there that we're supposedly supposed to...
It's not nebulous.
Listen to me. I am very serious about this.
Well, I tell you, you're going to be very serious when you sit in a women's prison for murder.
Oh yeah, that for the jury was our smoking gun.
But defense attorneys assert Ron and Pam were not talking about the murder of Gary Triano. Instead, he was extorting Pam for money.
I'm terrified of everything.
I know.
I mean, I'm living in total fear.
He's making these threats to embarrass her. He knows that she is in all these newspaper articles as a suspect in her ex-husband's bombing. He wants to threaten her reputation in the Aspen community. If he was a real hitman, why is he not threatening her with her life or threatening her family or kids? That's what happens when you have a cold-blooded killer.
The defense doesn't just try to point out how neither Ron nor Pam could be tied directly to the bomb at the scene of the crime. The defense goes one step further and says the culprit is somebody else entirely. Hot-headed billionaire heir Neil McNeese, out that 80 grand to Triano and enraged by his lies and deceit.
Neil McNeese. He lends Gary $80,000 and gets a ring for collateral. He finds out the ring is only worth $8,000 and he's livid. He's furious. He threatens to kill Gary per Dr. D'Antonio.
Remember, Dr. D'Antonio had come forward after Gary died, claiming that Gary Triano was on Neil McNeese's alleged kill list and that he was responsible for Gary Triano's death.
Lawrence D'Antonio was called to the stand, and this was really the crutch of the defense's argument.
I wouldn't describe Neil as a friend.
I heard Neil say he was going to kill Gary Triano probably 10,000 times. It was pure obsession. His hatred was pure obsession.
The defense argues that McNeese not only had motive, he also had the means, with a woodworker friend named Jerry Capuano, who they claim had a shop and the know-how to make a remote-controlled pipe bomb.
The other things found at Mr. Capuano's shop. You saw that little red thing that was used to put together wires. There was one of those at Capuano's shop. There's an exact one of those in the bomb parts that were found.
It makes for an interesting story. They're saying, oh, look at this. Neil McNeese was the real killer, and Capuano was the person who made the bomb. All of them are deceased, so we're not able to follow up on this.
Authorities continue to assert there's no evidence tying McNeese or Capuano to the murder. The McNeese family issuing a statement in 2014, maintaining their belief in his innocence and relief that justice might prevail.
But I mean, the bottom line is we don't have any question whatsoever that Pam Phillips hired Ron Young to kill Gary.
Pamela Phillips never testified during the entire trial. We got glimpses of her personality, right? During the trial, she would look at the camera, she would smile at the camera, even mouthing the words at one point, "I love you," to the camera during court proceedings.
The camera had always loved Pam right back. Now, after 2 months of testimony, it was time to see what a jury would feel about Pam Phillips as they decided her fate.
The lights flickered in the courtroom. My cousin Heather was sitting in front of me, and she turned and looked, and we just lost it.
We're on verdict watch as jury deliberation continues in the Pamela Phillips murder for hire trial. The Aspen socialite is accused of hiring...
After 26 days of testimony, with 100 witnesses, 670 exhibits, the fate of Pam Phillips lies in the hands of the jury.
Do you find the defendant, Pamela Ann Phillips, guilty of first-degree murder?
Quiet cries
stories of joy and justice. Triano's family says today's verdict has been a long time coming.
Like seconds after the judge said guilty, the lights flickered in the courtroom. It was surreal.
What did that tell you, those lights?
That he was there. That he knows.
Gary's family was relieved by all this. The murder was in 1996. Our trial was now 18 years later. I mean, I don't think they wanted it to be Pam, but they knew it was.
Pamela Phillips' attorney maintains his client is not responsible for her ex-husband's death.
The fact that she's going to prison is going to eat away at me the rest of my life.
Pamela Phillips was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
After hearing her sentence, the once prominent socialite turns to address a packed courtroom, the only way she could do so without facing questions.
I am innocent. I am innocent. I am innocent. Okay? This is hard. It's so hard for me. It's a nightmare.
She showed no remorse. She actually turned around to the gallery for the first time. At this point, she was just pandering to the camera.
And I don't understand how this can even happen, right?
Never any mention as to the loss of life, but everything came back to the impact it had on her personally.
Outside the courtroom, after losing their father almost 2 decades earlier, Gary's children expressing both gratitude and sadness at the outcome.
We'd like to thank all our friends and everyone who supported us through this entire time. And we're sorry that it had to come to this, because this woman was actually part of our family.
Meanwhile, Pam's accomplice, Ron Young, also spending the rest of his life in prison, and he's exhausted all of his appeals. Pam, however, is still fighting for post-conviction relief based on DNA evidence found back in 2014.
We found DNA on threads of 2 screws that were embedded into the platform, which was wood, for the pipe bomb. When that came in, we were able to exclude Ronald Young.
Pam's appellate attorney maintaining that new, more sophisticated DNA technology will prove that someone other than Ron Young and Pam Phillips murdered Gary Triano.
Well, the next step in the process, we did file our petition for post-conviction relief. I'm hopeful that we can do some genealogical testing if we can find the money to do that.
They get better DNA that come back and tie to Jerry Capuano, then that might get her a chance for a new trial.
Prosecutors stand by the verdict. They continue to say that neither billionaire Neil McNeese nor his friend Jerry Capuano were in any way responsible for Gary's murder.
Where I find fault with this is that they, didn't submit Gary Triano as a reference sample. Now, whose DNA do you think is probably all over that scene? How do you buy screws at a hardware store? You don't buy screws that have never been touched by another human being. So finding some lone DNA profile and a blast debris doesn't impress me.
How do you like to remember your Uncle Gary?
Every November 1st, I would go to La Paloma Golf Course and put flowers in the 18th hole.
At a local cemetery, there's a bench inscribed with his name and Gary's favorite poem, Rudyard Kipling's If, the classic tribute to the same endurance and optimism that Melissa always saw in her uncle, who in the face of life's setbacks and defeats sought always to remain admirably strong. Would you mind reading part of it for us out loud?
If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those 2 impostors just the same, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss and lose and start again at your beginning and never breathe a word about your loss. And that's just how my uncle lived.
The rain never really leaves Oregon. It seeps into the soil, into the memory, into the evidence left behind. On March 14, 2003, in the quiet logging town of Silver Falls, a 17-year-old high school student named Emma Rose Harlow walked out of her evening shift at the diner on Main Street and was never seen again. The last image of her was captured on a grainy surveillance tape, blurry dark, just a silhouette walking into the fog. What followed was one of the most haunting disappearances the state had ever seen, a case that froze in time, buried under years of silence, until a podcast uploaded 20 years later cracked it wide open. The night Emma vanished, the town was asleep by 10. Silver Falls had that kind of rhythm, orderly, repetitive, almost too still. Locals called it a safe place, a slice of old America wrapped in pine trees. But the following morning, that illusion collapsed. Emma's uniform was found folded neatly on a bench behind the diner. Her backpack still zipped. Inside it, her homework, her wallet, and a single Polaroid of her and her mother smiling by a river. Her phone flip style scratched was never found. By noon, the sheriff's department had set up roadblocks. Helicopters combed the forest ridge. Volunteers scoured the trails. But the woods of Oregon have a way of hiding things, swallowing sound and time. Within 48 hours, the search shifted from rescue to recovery. Locals began whispering theories: an ex-boyfriend, a truck driver, a drifter passing through. But none of it fit. Emma wasn't the type to run. She had college applications waiting, a life mapped out in careful lines. The investigation dragged for months. Detectives went door to door. They interviewed over 200 people, yet not a single trace surfaced. The only clue that stood out was a set of muddy footprints leading from the diner's back exit into the tree line, 2 different sides and 2 directions. It was as if Emma had walked into the forest with someone, and only one had come back. The sheriff at the time, Walter Dune, called it a tragedy that made no sense. He faced the cameras, once his jaw tight, the exhaustion visible. Behind him, the missing person poster fluttered in the wind. "Have you seen Emma Rose Harlow?" After that press conference, he stopped speaking publicly. Within a year, he retired. Locals said the case broke him. Then the silence began. Year after year, the poster faded, the file collected dust. Emma's mother, Linda, refused to move away. Every Christmas, she left a wrapped gift on her daughter's bed. The community eventually moved on. The diner was sold repainted, renamed. Teenagers grew up hearing the story like a ghost tale, the girl who walked into the woods and never came back. But time doesn't erase everything. It waits. In February 2023, a podcast appeared online. No ads, no sponsors, no credits. Just a black thumbnail with a white waveform and a title, Episode 1. Silver Falls, 2003. The voice behind it was distorted, genderless. The audio quality was rough, almost amateur, but the content was surgical. It began with the sound of rain hitting a metal roof, then a pause, and the voice said Emma didn't disappear. She was taken. And the one who took her still lives among you. Within 48 hours, the episode hit 500,000 streams. Locals panicked. The police reopened their inbox. Reporters flooded the town. The next episode dropped 2 days later, revealing details never made public. Emma's broken bracelet found 2 miles from the diner, the missing segment of the CCTV tape, and a claim that one of the original deputies destroyed evidence. Detectives from the Oregon State Police were called back in. The new task force compared the podcast's timeline with the original files. Somehow, the anonymous narrator knew about a specific tire tread found near the scene, a detail that had never been released. That changed everything. Whoever was behind the microphone either had access to the case file or was involved. By March, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit stepped in. They cross-referenced the voice pattern. Nothing matched. It was synthetic, altered with layers of modulation, but the words felt too precise to be random. The episodes referenced exact times, weather conditions, even snippets of old police radio chatter. Someone had done their homework or was reliving it. Then came the twist. Episode 4 dropped at midnight. The voice said the deputy who took the bracelet checked his storage locker. The next morning, officers raided a facility 15 miles from town. Inside an old storage unit registered to Deputy Carl Benson, retired, they found a sealed evidence bag labeled Harlow Case Exhibit B, a bracelet with Emma's initials. The serial number matched the missing evidence log from 2003. Benson was arrested within hours. He denied everything, claimed the bag had been planted, but DNA traces on the bracelet showed something else, a faint skin cell mixture belonging to a male relative. Benson had one brother, Tom Benson, a local mechanic who had died in 2010. The working theory exploded had the real perpetrator been hiding behind a family shield all along. The podcast continued relentless. Each episode dropped like a hammer, exposing forgotten reports, inconsistencies, and redacted pages. The final recording ended with the same voice whispering, "You buried the truth under pine needles, but I never left the woods." Investigators followed that line literally. In early April, cadaver dogs were brought to the ridge near Old Hollow Trail, 2 miles from the diner. They found bone fragments buried shallow beneath moss and leaves. Forensics confirmed they belonged to Emma Rose Harlow. 2 decades gone, her remains lay within walking distance of where she was last seen. The town froze again. Silver Falls turned into a headline. The podcast's final message became prophecy. The FBI tried to trace its origin, but every upload came from a VPN chain routed through multiple countries. The voice, the signal, the metadata, nothing led anywhere. It was as if the storyteller had vanished into the same fog Emma once did. In the following week, small details trickled out. The autopsy revealed trauma consistent with blunt force. No signs of restraint, no weapon left behind. Just one fracture at the base of the skull. Detectives believed Emma had known her killer. There were no defensive wounds, no struggle. When journalists asked Linda Harlow how she felt, her answer chilled the press room. Someone out there loved her enough to speak when no one else would. She refused further interviews. By summer, the case was officially declared solved. But to the people of Silver Falls, it wasn't closure, it was exposure. A mirror held up to a town that had chosen silence over truth. Some locals swore the podcast was made by a former cop seeking redemption. Others believed it was Emma's best friend Mara Tully, who had moved away years earlier after receiving threats. None of them could prove it. Even now, the episodes remain online, 11 total, each ending with the sound of rain and a line that has become folklore: "You can hide in the dark, but sound travels forever." The diner has since been torn down. A memorial stands where the building once was a simple stone with her name engraved. People leave flowers, sometimes headphones. The forest is still there, quiet as ever, pretending it doesn't remember. But Silver Falls never forgot. And every time it rains, some say they hear it. The faint echo of that anonymous voice carried by the wind, retelling the story of a girl who vanished into the fog and a secret that refused to stay buried. The second wave of investigation hit Silver Falls like a storm that refused to die. Reporters filled the diner's old parking lot, the same cracked pavement where Emma Rose Harlow had last stood 20 years before. Satellite vans lined Main Street. Every window glowed with televisions tuned to the same story, the podcast that solved a cold case. Yet behind the breaking news, something darker stirred. The voice that started it all hadn't spoken again. Not a trace. Not a post. The last upload stopped right after the bones were found. The silence was louder than the storm. Detective Eli Navarro, 42, newly reassigned from Portland, was placed in charge of the reopened case. He was known for solving the unsolvable, a man who believed there was no such thing as coincidence, only timing. Navarro arrived in Silver Falls 2 weeks after the discovery, holding the original 2003 case file like a relic. It was yellowed, brittle, and half of it was missing. Pages torn, notes blacked out. The first thing he noticed was how neatly chaos had been organized. Everything about the investigation screamed control, evidence sealed, before analysis timelines, adjusted, interviews summarized, but not transcribed. It wasn't incompetence, it was precision. Someone had curated the narrative. He started with the podcast. The FBI's cyber unit provided a partial trace, first upload from a device linked to a Portland public Wi-Fi network near the riverfront. The account's name, Echoes from Pine, had been created 6 days before the first episode dropped. The payment email used for hosting led to a dead mailbox registered under the initials ERH Emma's own. That detail shattered the task force. Either someone was mocking the system or someone had access to personal data lost decades ago. Navarro replayed the episodes obsessively. Late at night in his motel room, he'd sit with headphones on, scribbling timestamps. The rain at the start of every recording wasn't random. It was an identical audio loop, 28 seconds long, extracted from a 2004 Oregon weather archive. Whoever created the podcast had engineering knowledge. The pacing, the voice modulation, the use of static between revelations, all deliberate. It was storytelling built for shock value, but embedded with clues. One night, as Navarro listened to episode 5 again, something caught him, a sound, barely audible beneath the voice, like a mechanical hum, rhythmic, consistent. He filtered the frequency. It was a rotary fan, the kind found only in older audio booths. That narrowed it down to a specific era of equipment. Not digital, analog. Whoever made this used old tools to hide among modern systems. A ghost with a cassette. Meanwhile, public interest turned feverish. True crime fans dissected every frame, every sentence. Reddit threads exploded. Amateur sleuths compared voice patterns, tone inflections, even breath pauses. One user uploaded an overlay of the podcast's rain loop with footage from an abandoned radio station outside Salem, a match near perfect. The building KLM-RFM had shut down in 2007 after a fire. Navarro visited it personally. Inside, everything was covered in soot and silence. But one booth still had power rigged through a stolen extension from a nearby barn. On the desk, an old microphone, a recorder, and a sticky note with 3 words scrawled in shaky handwriting: tell her story. DNA swabs found nothing. No fingerprints, no leads. Yet Navarro couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was behind Echoes from Pine wasn't finished. They had wanted the bones found. They had wanted Benson's name exposed. But now they were waiting for something or someone. He started digging into Deputy Carl Benson's past. On paper, his record was clean. No disciplinary actions, 22 years on the force, retired with commendation. But the podcast had been right about one thing: the missing evidence bag. When Navarro rechecked the original property logs, he found inconsistencies, items registered, then removed, then re-added under different barcodes. Whoever did it knew the system well enough to erase their own trail. When Benson was interrogated again, this time under Navarro's supervision, his demeanor cracked. At first defensive, then resigned, he admitted to mishandling evidence, but not theft. "It wasn't me," he said, voice trembling. "He told me to do it." Navarro asked who. Benson's answer was almost a whisper. "Sheriff Doone." He said it was for protection. The name hit like a thunderclap. Sheriff Walter Doone, the man who'd once called the case a tragedy that made no sense. He was now 73, living alone near the coast, long retired. Navarro drove there the next morning. The old sheriff opened the door, slowly leaning on a cane. His eyes carried years of sleeplessness. When shown the photos, the bracelet, the evidence logs, the sticky note, Doone froze. His hand trembled as he touched the image of Emma. "That girl haunted me," he murmured. "You think I don't hear her name every night? We did everything we could." But Navarro pressed harder. The podcast had accused someone within the department of hiding evidence. Doone looked away, tears welling. "We were told to close it quietly. Federal interest. Don't ask who." Federal. That word twisted everything. Navarro contacted the Bureau. There was no record of any federal involvement in 2003, but a single memo surfaced dated April 2004 referencing sensitive local cooperation regarding missing person Harlow linked to unrelated investigation. The rest was redacted. By then, the town was unraveling. Reporters camped outside Doone's property. Online forums speculated that Emma had witnessed something she wasn't supposed to see. Some said she'd stumbled upon an illegal shipment site near the woods, a rumor about stolen government equipment hidden in rural Oregon. It was wild, unproven. Yet somehow, the pieces started aligning. In May 2023, Navarro received an anonymous package, inside a single cassette tape labeled Silver Falls Night 2. He found a player at a pawn shop and pressed play. Static, then rain, then that same voice. Detective Navarro, you're close. The truth was signed off in 2004, buried in federal ink. Emma saw what they were building in the trees. The tape ended abruptly. What they were building, Navarro drove back to Silver Falls that night. The forest was endless, but something about the phrase in the trees echoed. He pulled up the old forestry records from 2002 to 2004. A private company named North Edge Research had leased 40 acres near Old Hollow Trail for environmental testing. The company dissolved a year later. No listed owner, no physical address. He hiked the site the next morning with a forensic team. Beneath layers of moss, they uncovered remnants of concrete foundations, old wiring, broken glass metal beams scorched black. One of the agents called out. "Sir, we've got something." They had found a fragment of a rusted badge. The inscription was faint, but legible, property of North Edge Security Division. The Bureau confirmed that North Edge had been a front used in several classified projects related to surveillance testing in rural areas. The connection was chilling. If Emma had seen or photographed something near that site, her disappearance may not have been random. Navarro went public. In a press conference, he admitted they were pursuing new federal leads tied to a defunct contractor operating in Silver Falls during the time of Emma's disappearance. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted. The clip went viral overnight. 2 days later, the podcast returned. Episode 12, a new unexpected upload. No intro, no rain, just breathing. Then the voice said, "You were warned not to dig." Silence. Then static, long and shrill. Navarro froze as he listened. It wasn't just a recording anymore. It was live. The background noise carried faint, identifiable details. A motel room clock, the soft hum of an air conditioner. It was his room. He looked up. The light flickered. The sense of being watched grew unbearable. Someone had been inside. For the next week, Navarro slept in his car. He refused to stay in the same place twice. The Bureau advised him to go silent. But he didn't stop. He cross-referenced the cassette's handwriting with known samples from the 2003 evidence file. A match appeared: Mara Tully, Emma's best friend, who had vanished from public records in 2005 after moving to Canada. He found her in Seattle, living under a different name, working at a university radio lab. She denied involvement at first, then broke. "You think this is about justice," she said. "This is about guilt." We all knew. We just didn't have proof. When Navarro asked who we meant, she whispered, "Those who heard the tape." What tape, he pressed? The one Emma recorded before she disappeared. Her words detonated the silence. There had been a tape. One that never appeared in evidence, never logged. Mara said Emma had confided in her days before the disappearance, saying she had found something near the North Edge site, a hidden structure, strange equipment men working at night. She recorded the sounds on her old cassette player, afraid of what she'd discovered. But after Emma vanished, the tape disappeared too, until someone used it as the backbone of the podcast. The realization hit Navarro like a flood. The podcast wasn't just a confession or a taunt. It was Emma's voice, repurposed, echoed, distorted, woven into a digital labyrinth. Someone had used her own recording to expose the cover-up. And whoever that someone was, they were still out there hiding behind static, watching every move, waiting for the truth to fully surface. Would you like me to continue with part 3, where Navarro uncovers the lost recording and begins piecing together how Emma's original tape became the blueprint for Echoes? From Pine. The cassette Mara mentioned was a ghost from another era, a myth whispered in interviews but never confirmed. Navarro left Seattle that night with her words replaying in his head, the one Emma recorded, before she disappeared. He drove through the storm windshield wipers, screaming against the rain, every flash of lightning pulling him deeper into the obsession. If the tape existed, it was the missing heartbeat of the case, the sound that started everything. Back in Silver Falls, the motel room felt colder. Navarro placed the original cassette labeled Silver Falls Night 2 on the table and stared at it. Its plastic shell cracked, the handwriting messy, urgent. He played it again. Static. Rain. Then the voice. You were warned not to dig. But this time, Navarro noticed something new. A faint echo layered beneath the static, softer, feminine, almost pleading. He filtered the background frequencies through the Bureau's audio lab. After hours of processing, the voice emerged clearer, fragile yet steady. If they find this, it means I didn't make it home. Emma's voice. The lab confirmed this match through archival recordings from a 2002 school project. There was no doubt. The anonymous podcast had used Emma's real voice, spliced, edited, and buried under artificial distortion. Every episode had carried fragments of her final message. Echoes from Pine wasn't just a title. It was literal. Navarro's discovery shook the Bureau. It meant someone had possession of Emma's original recording for nearly 20 years. Someone who had chosen the exact moment 2 decades later to weaponize it. He requested access to all recovered personal effects from the Harlow residence, but most had been destroyed in a flood back in 2011. Only one box remained labeled Personal Media 2003. Inside were a few CDs, photos, and an old mini cassette recorder. The batteries had corroded, but the tape inside was intact. When he pressed play, the hiss of air filled the room, then a voice, Emma's again, younger, calm. Testing, testing. Okay, Friday night near the woods. I can hear them again. Same truck, same sound. It's like drilling, but there's no light except one red flash every few seconds. I'm not crazy. If I disappear, it's because of this. The recording ended abruptly, replaced by silence. Navarro sat still, listening to the hum of his own breathing. Emma had captured something. The red flash, the sound of drilling, the night before she vanished. He brought the tape to the forensic audio division. When they isolated the background, they identified a low mechanical rhythm matching a soil compaction device used in underground installations. Cross-referenced with state construction permits, only one project fit the timeframe, a North Edge research site expansion approved under a false environmental license 5 miles from the diner. Navarro organized a covert dig with Bureau authorization. Beneath a layer of wet soil, they unearthed what looked like an abandoned shaft covered with metal plating. Inside, the stench of decay and rust choked the air. But deeper down, they found something that made the entire team freeze a room. A concrete bunker half collapsed, filled with shattered equipment wires and a chair bolted to the floor. On the wall, a single phrase was carved in jagged letters. Listen closely. In one corner, a rusted box held reels of magnetic tape labeled Field Tests 0203. Navarro took them to the evidence lab. When restored, they revealed muffled voices, men discussing signal frequencies, and sound retention experiments. But one reel stood out. It began with a young woman's scream, then silence, then the same mechanical drilling heard in Emma's tape. The timestamps matched the week she disappeared. Navarro didn't sleep for 2 days. The connection was undeniable. Whatever North Edge was doing wasn't just environmental testing. It was acoustic experimentation, recording and manipulating sound frequencies in remote conditions. If Emma had stumbled across their site, she had found proof of something no one was meant to know. Then, as the news of the discovery leaked, the podcast came alive again. Another episode appeared without warning. No title, no intro. Only one line: you found the room. Now hear the truth. What followed was unlike the previous uploads. It wasn't Emma's voice. This time, it was a man's distorted but forceful confessing in fragments. We were told it was harmless, testing ground resonance. But then the subject screamed. They said to bury it. We buried everything. Then static. Then a sound that made every technician freeze, the same metallic hum from Emma's original tape layered with her last recorded breath. Within hours, Navarro's team traced the upload to a storage server located in Salem. The IP led them to a local sound engineer, Alan Dorsey, 58, formerly employed by North Edge as an acoustics consultant. Navarro and his agents raided his apartment at dawn. Inside, they found walls covered with reel-to-reel players, speakers, and waveform graphs pinned like crime photos. Dorsey was nowhere to be found. On his desk sat a note written in pencil. She deserved to be heard. As the Bureau searched for Dorsey, Navarro noticed one detail: a cassette player still running, looping the same sound endlessly. He pressed stop, ejected the tape, and saw the label ERH Last Transmission. He played it once, and everything changed. The recording began with rain, real rain. This time, not the looped sample. Then Emma's voice again, breathless, terrified. "If you hear this, they're already close. He said they're testing something underground. It hurts your ears when you're near. I saw the sheriff there. I saw him." A crash. A scream. Then static, swallowing everything. Navarro felt the ground shift under him. Sheriff Walter Dune. The man who swore he had tried everything. The man who claimed federal agents told him to stay quiet. He wasn't just covering up incompetence, he was part of it. That night, Navarro drove to the Coast House again. Dune wasn't there. The place was empty, lights off, furniture covered in dust. But the air reeked of gasoline. In the fireplace, fresh ashes glowed. On the mantel sat a framed photo of Dune and Emma at a school safety event taken 2 weeks before she disappeared. On the back of the photo, written in fading ink, "Forgive me." Outside, the storm screamed through the cliffs. Navarro stepped onto the porch and noticed tire tracks leading toward the woods behind the property. He followed them with a flashlight boot, sinking into the mud. At the tree line, the beam hit metal, an abandoned police SUV, its doors open, engine cold. Inside, a tape recorder. Navarro pressed play. Dune's voice filled the night. "You were right, Emma. I tried to stop them. They said it was national security, but it was just greed. I buried your file because they buried you. If anyone's listening, I'm sorry." Then a single gunshot. The recording ended. At sunrise, they found Dune's body 50 yards away, lying in the mud, revolver in hand. The press called it closure. Navarro knew better. Dune hadn't uploaded that confession, someone else had. Someone who wanted it heard. Someone who still had access to everything. When the news broke, the podcast channel vanished overnight. Every file, every upload gone. But the damage was done. Silver Falls became a crime map, the ghost of a town dissected by strangers online. A month later, Navarro received a letter. No return address, just a USB drive inside and a short message. "You stopped listening too soon." The drive contained a single file labeled reversed.wev. When played backward, the voice returned faint female familiar. It wasn't Dune. It was the one who recorded me. Emma hadn't accused the sheriff in her final words. She was naming someone else. Someone who had been with her that night, holding the recorder, capturing her last moments. The realization hit Navarro like cold steel. The recorder had been found among her belongings. But if Emma was in the tape, who was behind the camera? The rain returned the next morning, as if the forest had decided to mourn. Navarro sat at the edge of his motel bed, eyes locked on the USB drive still plugged into his laptop. The voice on that reversed audio played over and over in his head. It wasn't Dune. It was the one who recorded me. The implications cut deep. Everything they believed about Emma's final hours had just turned inside out. The person behind the camera, the one who held the recorder? Emma had been confiding in someone, not just documenting. She wasn't alone when she approached the North Edge site. Someone was with her, someone she trusted. Navarro pulled up the original list of Emma's close contacts, friends, classmates, relatives. Most had been interviewed back in 2003. But now he looked at the list differently, not through the lens of proximity, but access. Who could have been there that night with her? Who had knowledge of the woods of audio gear, of frequencies and fear? One name stood out. Caleb Rowan, then 18 senior at Silver Falls High. He was in Emma's photography class. Their teacher had described them as inseparable during the last semester. Caleb lived 2 blocks from the Harlow house, often walked Emma to school. No criminal record, no red flags. After graduation, he left town for a technical school in Arizona, then disappeared from official records by 2007. Navarro dug deeper. Caleb's college was real, 2 semesters completed, but his declared major, audio engineering. His final project, according to school logs, was titled Perception Through Distortion, Emotional Resonance in Obscured Speech. Navarro's pulse quickened. That project name wasn't just academic fluff. It was the podcast's DNA. He searched for Caleb's parents. Both had died in 2012 in a house fire ruled accidental. The insurance payout was never claimed. But the property, a small cabin near the eastern ridge, remained untouched. Navarro drove there at dusk. The road was narrow, swallowed by trees. No sign of activity. The cabin stood crooked, its frame warped by time. Inside dust covered every surface, but beneath that dust, Navarro spotted something out of place: wires snaking under the floorboards, a generator still warm. A trapdoor beneath a faded rug creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. He drew his flashlight and stepped down. The air thickened. At the bottom, he entered what looked like a bunker not unlike the North Edge site. A wall of tape decks lined one side. On the other, a desk with 3 screens all powered off. Microphones hung from the ceiling like vines. On the far wall, a mural had been painted. Emma's face emerging from static, her eyes turned into waveforms. On the desk, one item pulsed with a red light, a hard drive labeled Echoes from Pine Final Archive. Navarro inserted it into his laptop. It contained everything. The original project files, source tapes, audio overlays, voice modulation software, even drafts of episodes that were never published. But one folder stopped him cold: Emma, raw tapes. He clicked it open. Inside were 6 recordings, uncut, untouched. In the first, Emma is laughing. She's walking through the forest, teasing the person behind the mic. "You're gonna get me killed with this thing. What is this, a walkie-talkie from Radio Shack?" Then Caleb's voice, clear, relaxed. "Just talk. I'll clean it up later." They had been working on something together. A project, a prank, or a warning. Navarro listened to all 6. Across the tapes, the tension grows. Emma becomes more anxious. The final recording is chilling her voice, breaking, whispering, "You need to stop recording. Caleb, this isn't funny anymore. I think they saw us." Then rustling, then silent. No screams, no impact, just silence. Navarro looked through the file metadata. The last modification was dated March 13th, 2003, 10:42 p.m., roughly 30 minutes before she vanished. There it was. The answer had always been with Caleb. He had been there. He had recorded her final moments, and now, 20 years later, he had shaped her voice into a weapon. But where was he? Navarro traced login activity from the podcast's hosting platforms. Several pings came from an IP in Aberdeen, Washington, logged during the week the first episodes dropped. It was a small coastal town, quiet, out of the way. He notified the bureau. Within hours, they triangulated the signal to a self-storage unit registered under the name Pine Echo LLC. Agents stormed the facility at 2 a.m. The unit was empty. Just foam padding, audio equipment wrappers, and a note pinned to the wall. "Sound lives longer than memory." The trail went cold again. Back in Silver Falls, Navarro visited Linda Harlow. She sat by the fireplace holding Emma's childhood sweater. When he told her what he'd found, she didn't cry. Instead, she asked only one thing. Was she scared? Navarro couldn't answer. But later that night, alone in his car, he played the first tape again. Emma's voice rang out, warm, sarcastic, unaware of what was coming. And then, buried under her laughter, Caleb's voice murmured, "Just in case you vanish into the fog." That line would haunt Navarro for the rest of his life. And in the empty corners of the web, a new file appeared. No title, no credits. Just Emma's voice saying, "You found him. But you still don't know why." Fog rolled in heavier than usual the next morning, wrapping the trees like gauze, muting the entire town. Navarro stared at his screen, watching Emma's waveform bounce in silence. "You found him. But you still don't know why." That voice clip, uploaded anonymously just hours after the Aberdeen unit was raided, confirmed what Navarro already suspected: Caleb Rowan was still one step ahead. He had turned the manhunt into a dialogue, a ritual, and he was still speaking through her. The question was no longer, where is Caleb, but why had he built all of this? Why record Emma's voice, distort it, hide it inside episodes like broken memories? Why wait 20 years before letting her speak again? Navarro turned back to the hard drive recovered from the cabin. Buried deep within nested folders was a file titled Project Residual. It contained hundreds of audio samples, fragmented speech, atmospheric loops, modulated frequencies. But it also included detailed notes, each labeled like a research journal. Entry 07, December 12, 2002. Tested directional mic 4 at the old trail site. Picked up subharmonics in the pine line. It's like the trees carry echoes. No birds for 300 meters. The silence feels artificial. Entry 12, January 4th, 2003. Emma heard it this time. Same static pattern at 3 a.m. She said it made her dizzy. I think they're running field pulses. This isn't weather. This is controlled. Entry 18 March 9th, 2003. She recorded one of them. A voice, not ours. Playback distorts every time. Emma says she wants to stop. I don't blame her, but we're too far in. Navarro's skin went cold. This wasn't just a podcast. It had started as an experiment. Caleb and Emma had been recording unexplained phenomena in the forest months before her disappearance. Frequencies, sounds, voices. Navarro cross-checked the GPS coordinates logged in the entries with a 2003 satellite image. One entry marked Dead Zone South, aligned with a forgotten section of trail near where Emma's bones were found. The same place where cadaver dogs hit on exposed ground. That zone, when overlaid with historic EMF maps, showed anomalous readings, electromagnetic spikes without any geological explanation. He needed answers beyond criminal theory. He called in a forensic acoustic specialist from the University of Washington, Dr. Janelle Price, who had worked on military sound disruption projects. She reviewed the tapes in silence, occasionally pausing to analyze wave patterns. After several hours, she turned to Navarro and said, "You're not just dealing with a cover-up. This was an audio weapon test." Navarro blinked. "Excuse me. Resonant frequency disruption," she explained. "The human body reacts violently to certain low-frequency waves. Disorientation, nausea, hallucination. If those tapes are authentic, and they seem to be, then someone was running sound field tests in that forest, likely underground, and Emma recorded it." The word weapon shifted the narrative violently. This was no longer a local cold case. It was a national security breach disguised as a missing persons file. Caleb hadn't just built a podcast, he had reconstructed the truth from pieces no one was supposed to have. And Emma had been the first civilian casualty. Navarro took that finding to the bureau. Red tape closed in immediately. Files were sealed. The case was frozen, pending federal review. But Navarro had seen too much. He had heard her voice, raw, real pleading. He wasn't stopping. He returned to the one person left who might know more, Mara Tully. She hadn't responded since their last meeting, but Navarro found her again in Seattle, inside the university audio lab, working late. Her hands trembled when she saw him. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I found the tapes," he replied, "and I know you knew." Mara sat down slowly. "We didn't understand what we were hearing. Caleb was obsessed. Said the government was testing long-wave interference near the ridge. Emma thought it was paranoia. Until she got sick. Nosebleeds. Ringing ears. That's when she wanted out." "Why didn't you say anything?" Navarro asked. "Because we were kids. And because someone came to the school a week after she disappeared." Navarro's breath caught. "Who?" "Two men in suits. Not local. They asked about Emma's locker, took her notebooks, told the principal it was part of a national safety review. Then they vanished." She pulled out an envelope from her desk drawer. "I kept one thing they missed. Inside was a torn notebook page, Emma's handwriting. Caleb says sound can erase memory. What if they're testing that on us?" Erase memory. Navarro recalled the journal entries, the lack of bird activity, the gaps in Emma's own voice recordings, the missing time. This wasn't just about one girl's disappearance. It was about silencing an entire zone of truth. Then came the final blow. At 2:14 a.m., Navarro's phone buzzed. A bureau contact. A body had been found in the Columbia River. Male, mid-30s. Cause of death, drowning. Fingerprints matched Caleb Rowan. Navarro drove out in silence, Lights flashing, siren off. The body had no ID, no phone, but inside the right shoe was a plastic-wrapped mini cassette. They played it at the lab, Caleb's voice calm, quiet. This is the last echo. If you found this, I'm gone. I didn't kill Emma. I failed her. I wanted the world to know what we heard, what they did. She recorded proof. They buried it. They erased everything. So I made sure she would never be silent again. This isn't justice, but it's the closest we'll ever get. Then static. The final waveform ended in silence. Navarro sat back in the chair, eyes closed. Caleb was dead. The podcast was silent. But Emma's voice scattered across servers, hard drives, and memories had become permanent. No longer buried in pine, no longer forgotten. In Silver Falls, they held a second funeral. Linda placed the original tape recorder in her daughter's grave. No one spoke. The rain did enough. Yet somewhere online days later, a new upload appeared. Not from Echoes from Pine, but from an unknown account. It was just 6 seconds long, Emma's voice, whispering. I still remember the sound. Would you like me to continue with part 6, where new anomalies begin surfacing in the forest, and Navarro realizes Emma's recordings may have captured something far beyond human interference? The upload was only 6 seconds long, but it spread like fire across the forums. No title, no context. Just Emma's voice, clear, delicate whispering. I still remember the sound. It wasn't the message that shook Navarro. It was the signature embedded in the audio file, metadata scrambled and anonymized except for one field generated with Echo Engine V1. 3 Caleb Rowan, 2004. Caleb was dead. Officially. The fingerprints matched. The autopsy was signed. But this file was created after his death. Navarro didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in messages and patterns and footprints that people leave behind when they want to be found. This wasn't closure. It was a signal. The Bureau shut everything down the next day. Emma's case was resealed under national classification. A special agent visited Navarro at his motel and handed him a single-page directive. Do not pursue further leads. You are being reassigned. Navarro ignored it. He drove back to the forest, to the trail no one hiked anymore, to the place Emma called the dead zone. The air felt different there. He parked the car at the old diner site now, an empty slab of concrete graffiti, fading flowers dead. Rain hit the windshield like whispers. He entered the trees alone. The deeper he walked, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind. Just the sound of boots against wet earth and breath clouding in cold air. He reached the ridge where the north edge bunker had once stood, now sealed in concrete under orders from above. But the silence wasn't natural. It was engineered. Navarro took out the last working audio recorder. He had the same model Emma had used. He clicked record. Nothing. No static, no ambient hum, just digital blackness. He tried again. Still nothing. The device wasn't broken. It was being jammed. He turned back, but halfway down the trail something caught his ear. Faint. Distant. A tone, maybe. He held his breath. It sounded like a pulse. Rhythmic. Mechanical. Like the drilling Emma had recorded. But deeper, slower. More deliberate. He followed it. The trail curved west away from the mapped path. No footprints. No signs. The pulse grew louder, still irregular, like sonar bouncing between trees. Then it stopped. In front of him stood a clearing. The mud was flattened in a perfect circle, dead leaves arranged in a spiral. At the center, a speaker. Old, rusted. Wired to a small solar panel and a buried box. On top of the box, a photo Emma in her work uniform smiling. Navarro bent down. The speaker was still wired, the panel still feeding power. He pried open the box. Inside tapes, dozens, labeled Test Echo 01 through Test Echo 44. The handwriting wasn't Caleb's. It matched Emma's. He grabbed the first tape, inserted it into his recorder, and pressed play. Wind. Footsteps. Her voice. They said they stopped. But I can still hear it. Nights are louder here, like something's still moving underground. Another tape. Caleb thinks it's just machines. I think it's something else. It listens when we talk. When we record, it goes quiet. I don't think we're alone. Navarro listened to all of them one by one as rain fell and daylight died. The recordings changed over time from observations to paranoia to something more desperate. I dreamed of static. I woke up bleeding. He says I should stop coming, but I can't. I feel drawn to it now. If they erase me, let my voice stay. Navarro realized the truth wasn't buried with Caleb or Dune. It had been in Emma's hands the whole time. She had documented more than a cover-up. She had discovered something unnatural, something that affected the body, the mind, the soundscape of the world around her. And she kept recording it right up until the moment she vanished. Her tapes weren't just evidence, they were warnings. Navarro packed the tapes and hiked back in silence. At his motel, he digitized them all. Every last whisper, every gasp, every unanswered question. He made copies. Then, a week later, a file appeared on a public archive board used by acoustic engineers. It was titled Echoes from Pine _resonance_dump.zip. It contained all of Emma's raw recordings, unedited, unexplained. No one knew who uploaded it. Navarro said nothing, and then the forest began to speak again. A hiker went missing on the Southern Trail. Locals reported hearing a high-pitched ringing at night. Dogs refused to go near the old diner site. Online, a new voice appeared, anonymous, modulated, but not Caleb, not Emma. Echoes remain, and they are growing louder. The hum returned. This time, it wasn't through headphones or tapes. It vibrated through the floor of Navarro's motel room, a low, crawling throb that made the glass tremble on the nightstand. He stood still, heart racing, as the sound faded as quickly as it had come. No vehicle had passed. No thunder outside. Just the unmistakable rhythm, slow, mechanical, subterranean. He didn't sleep that night. He laid on the bed lights off, eyes open, trying to count how long between pulses. The intervals weren't regular. They shifted like breathing. At dawn, he called Dr. Janelle Price again. I think it's active, he said, whatever it was. Whatever they were testing, it's not dead. Price didn't sound surprised. She had spent the last week analyzing Emma's final batch of recordings. The results were disturbing. Several of the tapes contained infrasonic frequencies, the kind undetectable to the human ear but known to cause nausea, hallucinations, even panic attacks. More alarming was what those frequencies carried. Buried within the waveforms were distortions too organized to be static. Repeating patterns, not words, but structures. Shapes made of sound. This isn't just noise, Price said. This was constructed. Navarro stared at the waveform Emma had recorded in March 2003, the night before she vanished. He realized what Price meant. The audio file wasn't random. Its frequency spikes matched architectural blueprints. A repeating grid. A symmetrical design. Something underground. He pulled up old zoning maps of the forest. Between 1998 and 2003, a square parcel of land had been designated private federal research site, then quietly delisted. No permits, no environmental impact report, no public record. He filed a request for satellite imaging. The 2002 infrared scan showed a heat signature under the tree line, cool, circular, roughly the size of a warehouse. The most recent scan from 2023, completely blank, a digital blackout. He called it in. The Bureau refused support. His superior warned him off the record, "You don't want to be the one who makes noise where silence was paid for." So Navarro went alone. He hiked in under heavy rain. Emma's tapes loaded on his recorder, a portable frequency scanner clipped to his belt. The deeper he walked, the more distorted the signals became. Static buzzed through the scanner. Compass spun. GPS failed. Then the ground began to vibrate. He stopped at the ridge where the spiral of dead leaves had been. Nothing now, but soaked earth. He walked 30 paces west toward where the satellite had once shown a thermal anomaly. That's when the scanner started screaming. The frequency spike blew out the meter. The sound wasn't audible, but it struck Navarro like pressure in the skull, pushing inward, pulsing behind the eyes. He dropped to one knee, trying to breathe. Then it stopped. The rain eased. The forest fell back into dead silence. and under his boots he heard it a hollow echo. He dug with his hands. After 10 minutes, his fingers scraped cold steel. A hatch. Rusted, overgrown, but real. He cleared the edges and pried it open. A ladder descended into darkness. He climbed down. The air was damp, the silence oppressive. At the bottom, his flashlight flickered across metal walls. A corridor stretched ahead. Bolted doors lined each side. One stood ajar. He entered. The room was small. A chair, a terminal, a microphone. Audio reels stacked like relics. On the wall, faded stenciling, North Edge Acoustic Field Lab Echo Node 04. This was it, one of the original testing bunkers. He powered on the terminal. Dust choked the screen, but the drive still spun. Old software booted up, running a program titled Cognitive Response Patterning Phase 2. On the screen, text began to scroll. Real-time logs. As if waiting. User detected, initiating resonance calibration standby. Navarro stepped back. The hum returned deeper, closer. From the ceiling, a speaker crackled to life. Then a voice. Not Caleb, not Emma, a woman's voice. You shouldn't be here. Navarro froze. Who are you? Silence. Then they said I was unstable, that I couldn't be trusted with the patterns. Navarro's breath caught. It was not live. It was a recording. A loop. Another relic buried beneath time. The scanner buzzed again. The terminal flashed. A new file appeared on screen. Echo_log_Emma_voice. 2.way. He played it. Emma's voice distorted, terrified Caleb. This isn't right. This isn't audio. It's something else. It knows when I speak. It answers back. Navarro's blood ran cold. She hadn't just recorded a sound. She had communicated with it. A new window blinked open, transmission queued, ready to send. He killed the power, yanked the hard drive. The hum stopped. He climbed out, heart pounding. Behind him, the hatch slammed shut, metal on metal. No wind. No hands. Just gravity. He ran. At the edge of the forest, his phone buzzed, signal returned. One notification. A new podcast episode uploaded to the same old feed. Echoes from Pine episode 13. He pressed play. Emma's voice whispered, calm and clear. It's not a sound, it's a signal, and it's still transmitting. The episode published at noon. No warning, no teaser, no cover art, just a plain black square in the feed and a title that was not a title, only a timestamp. Navarro let it play on speaker in the empty motel room, curtains drawn, lamp off, rain skimming the window like fingernails. Emma's voice arrived without the usual hiss, clean and near, as if she were speaking from the space between the desk and the door. It's not a sound, it's a signal, and it's still transmitting. Then the hum rose from the floorboards again, a pressure more than a tone, an ache that found the bones behind his ears and pressed until his jaw clicked. He paused the audio. The pressure eased, but did not vanish. Somewhere beneath the town, whatever had slept was awake. He called Price. She answered on the second ring, breath quick, paper rustling, the clatter of a lab spinning up for an emergency. I saw it too, she said, not the episode, but the spike. Our monitors lit up in Seattle 5 minutes ago. A low-frequency burst that should not travel through bedrock just traveled through bedrock. It came from your woods, but it did not stay there. It refracted. It is bouncing off anything that will carry it. Navarro told her about the hatch and the node and the terminal that wanted to send a transmission through time as easily as a stone through a window. She swore under her breath and started listing places they needed to call, and maps they needed to overlay, and sensor arrays she could borrow if she leaned on favors she had promised never to ask. He listened, only half watching the motel's ceiling for cracks that were not there, watching the lamp's shade to see if the fabric trembled. It did. The episode had been up for 15 minutes when the first civilian report appeared online. A woman in Salem filmed the glass of water on her kitchen table as it rippled without a hand to touch it. A man in Vancouver posted a video of his dog howling at a wall. Not outside the window, not at a siren, at a wall. And in Silver Falls, Linda Harlow called Navarro and did not say hello. She said, I heard her again. He was already in the car before he knew where his keys were. He drove with one hand and dialed with the other, told Price to meet him at the house, told the bureau nothing at all. The rain had thinned to a mist that made the road brighter under headlights. When he pulled into Linda's driveway, she was on the porch with her coat unbuttoned and her hair unbrushed, staring out at the street as if she could see the year when her daughter had walked down it. Inside, the old stereo on the mantel was on, though no one had turned it on. The tape deck door was open empty, but the machine's reels rotated like a heartbeat. Over the speakers, a whisper breathed and caught, then weakened and returned not words yet, but the rhythm of a mouth near a microphone. Linda's hands shook and then steadied. "It said my name," she said. "It said Mom." Navarro put his hand close to the speaker grill and felt it tick. He traced the power cord and found nothing strange except for everything. The unit was not connected to any antenna and did not need to be. The whole town was an antenna now. Price arrived with a laptop, a small coil of wire, and a sensor that looked like a toy the size of a coin. She placed the coil near the stereo, watched numbers climb, frowned reset a scale, watched them climb further. She told Linda that she was brave and told Navarro that they were in trouble. "This is piggybacking," she said, "not just on power lines or pipes, on materials themselves. Anything that rings will ring if asked the right way." He asked if it could hurt anyone. She looked at Linda before she answered. "It already has. Not a bruise you can photograph. The kind that makes you forget your name or dream with your eyes open." They turned off the stereo, and the whisper kept going because the stereo had become a mouth, but the house was the chest beneath it. Outside, distant sirens threaded the wet air, one, then another, then a third that did not belong to medical or fire. The lean, broken cry of an emergency alert test from 2 towns away bleeding into theirs. Navarro's phone pulsed with messages he did not open. He stepped out onto the porch to get a line and felt the hum in the boards beneath his feet again, a soft push that stole a fraction of his balance. He sat on the steps and called the county dispatcher and heard static first, and then a human breath, and then an operator who sounded as if she had not slept. "Lines are jammed," she said. "We have reports of nausea clusters near the school, and we have a church with all the windows vibrating, and we have the highway lighting array flickering in a pattern someone swears is Morse. But it might just be panic." He told her to recommend everyone power down anything that could play a sound, then corrected himself and said everything that could carry one. She said the emergency management office wanted to know if they should broadcast an advisory, and he heard his own voice answer, "No too fast and too loud. You cannot scrape a match across a box and ask the fire to be polite." Price was at the kitchen table running a spectral analysis of the episode, while the whisper from the empty stereo dwindled, strengthened, dwindled again like a tide. She froze the waveform and zoomed until the line became a city of rectangles. "Someone is writing with this," she said. "Not letters, timing. Every rise and pause a clock hand." She overlaid the episode with Emma's oldest field tape, the one with the drilling and the red flash and the fear that sounded like thought. The alignments were obscene, too precise to be accident and too ugly to be art. He asked her if the nodes could still exist in other places, if the one he found was only one of many. She said yes, without ceremony, turned the laptop, showed him a map that was not a map, yet a sketch of points where civilian sensors across the region had hiccuped during the last burst. Points in a rough line running from the shadow of the Coast Range to the curve of the Columbia, then bending north toward towns with names only the rain knows how to pronounce. If this was a grid, this was its edge. He drove again because motion felt like courage and because stillness made the hum louder. Price rode with him, her laptop open in her lap cords, tangling at her feet, the sensor taped to the dash like a talisman. They turned off the radio and the heat and the air and drove with only the engine's low animal throat. In town, the lights in the diner lot pulsed, though there was no diner anymore. At the school, a custodian stood in the doorway with both hands on his head as if a siren were inside it. In the churchyard, a boy held his ears and sobbed without sound because the sound was not the kind that air carries. They stopped at the old mill bridge where the river narrowed and the guardrail had a dent from a crash that had not been tragic, only loud. Price asked him what Emma would have done if she had lived long enough to see this day. He said Emma would have recorded it like weather and then tried to decode the cloud. Then his phone rang and the name across the screen was Mara. He almost did not answer. He did. The line crackled with a quiet so deep it made his own voice sound like an intrusion. She said it found me in the lab. The signal. Through the oscilloscopes, through the speakers that were off through the room. I pressed my palms to the table and I could feel it there the way you feel music at a concert, not on your skin but under it. He told her to leave. She said she had, but the leaving did not help because a thing that can travel like this can ride inside the shape of you for a while and ring again when your bones remember. He told her to meet them at the bridge and she said no, go to the water plant instead. Because if he wanted to find a conduit larger than any wire or wall, he should go where the town's veins gather. The water plant was concrete and chain link and a security light that made the mist glow like breath. The hum here was not louder, but clearer, the simplicity of it worse than complexity, a child tapping the same note on a piano and finding that note inside your head. A technician in a yellow jacket met them with eyes too wide and a voice too tight. We shut the big pumps as a precaution, he said, but the gauges act like they are still hearing them, like the pipes have a memory of pressure. Price laid the coin sensor on a steel post and nodded once at the numbers. The signal loves uniform shapes, she said. Long, hollow ones, most of all. Navarro walked the perimeter with his hands at his sides the way he would if he wanted a dog not to bite him. He found a panel door that had not closed right, and beyond it a service ladder that dropped into echo. He went down. He was not supposed to, but supposed had broken a long time ago in a room with a microphone and a chair bolted to a floor. The chamber was cylindrical and tall enough to make a whisper fly up and return as weather. He stood at the center and he did not speak, and the room spoke anyway. Not words. A pulse that arrived in pairs like a heartbeat finding another heartbeat and asking permission to match. He counted his breath, forced it to be slow, refused to give the room a rhythm to borrow. He thought of Emma in the woods, with a recorder and bravery, and the human habit of asking the dark a question, as if the dark were obliged to be kind. When he climbed back up, Price was on the phone with someone who was yelling in a voice so quiet you had to know what panic looked like in order to hear it. She nodded again, then hung up and told him that the bureau was arriving, and that the people arriving were not the kind who asked permission before telling you to stop, and that the grid they suspected existed did exist, because a monitoring station in Idaho had just logged a companion spike, and a research buoy off the coast had pinged a signature that matched the forest's whisper like a rhyme. He asked her if sound could cross salt the way it crossed soil. She said not sound, but signal, and maybe the ocean had always been a better wire than anyone wanted to admit. The emergency alert screeched, then stopped. The phones in 100 pockets in the town blurted a warning no one knew how to obey, and somewhere a siren that had rusted into silence remembered a shape and made it. The bureau convoy angled down the plant road, black paint turning the mist into absence. Navarro felt the old anger he had trained out of his voice return. He told Price he was not going to be told to stand down again, while mothers heard their dead children tell them to listen. She said listen anyway. Not to them. To this. Because Emma's recordings were not a story. They were coordinates. She showed him her screen. She had parsed the pauses in the new episode as if they were numbers, and when she mapped them, the pattern that bloomed was not a line and not a circle and not a scatter, but a net. Each pause a knot, each hum a thread. Each knot sitting on a place where a town had once hosted a test site, or a relay, or a warehouse that never sold anything. Silver Falls was only one knot. The closest other lay in a strip of timberland north, where the county maps grew vague and the roads changed names without telling you. He told her to come, and she told him she would, and they left the plant before the convoy's doors opened, and men and women in jackets with polite letters on them began to decide what the truth would be called. The road north was a black ribbon. The mist thinned, and the trees leaned less, as if the forest itself were listening for a pitch it both feared and recognized. Price said, If this is an array, then two nodes talking can wake a third, and if people keep playing the episode without knowing what they are playing, they could connect knots that were never meant to be tied again. He asked her if they should tell everyone to stop listening. She said, "Try telling a fire not to be warm." They reached a gate across a road that did not admit to being a road. It wore a no trespassing sign that had peeled enough to make the letters smile. Beyond the gate, the hum strengthened, not loud but certain, the voice of a thing that knew it was being approached and did not care. He climbed over and she handed him the sensor and the laptop and did not say, "Be careful," because that belonged to a world where careful made a difference. The clearing was geometric, then broken by time concrete pads sinking into earth like bones into a couch. In the center, a structure rose that had once been a tower and was now a ribcage. At its base, a box the size of a coffin wore a plate that had lost its letters except for one word: echo. He crouched and pressed his palm to the metal, and the metal was warm. He felt the pulse again. It matched his heart, then waited, then asked to lead. He refused. He stood and took out the recorder and set it on the box and said Emma as if a name could anchor a storm. The air thinned. The hum folded inward like a breath drawn slow. Price was at his shoulder now, and her hand was on the box, too. And somewhere in a house with a quiet stereo, Linda Harlow leaned forward, and somewhere in a lab, Mara turned off every machine and listened to the power still left in the wires. Navarro pressed record and spoke the way people pray when they do not know to whom they are praying. "We hear you. That is enough for now." The speaker inside the box clicked like a throat, and the pulse altered by a fraction, and then a voice that was not Emma and not the anonymous whisper, and not any one human said a word that was not a word but for a moment resembled his name. He closed his eyes, opened them. The mist lifted. He saw his own breath as if the air had become colder inside his lungs than out. Then the voice was gone. The hum returned to its patient rhythm. The laptop showed numbers that said the signal had moderated. Not stopped, balanced. Price exhaled a laugh that was not joy and not relief. "You tuned it," she said. He shook his head. "We answered it." From the trees came the smallest sound, a bird trying 3 notes shyly as if the sky existed again. He and Price backed away from the box and left the recorder where it lay, red light blinking an eye that promised nothing. On the drive back, the town's lights were steady, and the bridge was quiet, and the water plant looked like a factory again. His phone chimed with a message he could not ignore, a link with no sender. He pressed it, and a page opened to a player with a single button. He tapped it, and Emma spoke like rain on a porch roof in a summer that had not yet learned to be cruel. "I still remember the sound," she said, and this time it was not a warning. It was a keepsake. He stopped the car under the old billboard and listened to the empty air. The hum did not vanish. It retreated like a tide that promises to return. He looked at Price, and she looked at him with the fear you keep when you know you will need it later. The town waited. The forest remembered. The grid lay buried under miles and miles of weather and history, like nerve under skin. He rested his forehead on the steering wheel and let the silence sit heavy and good. Then he started the engine. "Would you like me to continue with part 9, where the Bureau seizes the tapes, the town fractures under the weight of what it has heard, and Navarro decides whether to publish the coordinates hidden inside the episode or bury them for good?" They came at dawn with jackets that turned to slate under the mist, with polite mouths and hard eyes, with clipboards that made the taking legal, and cases that made it permanent. The convoy split at the edge of town like a vein, branching one stream toward the water plant, one toward Linda's street, one toward the ridge that still held the hush of last night's answer. Navarro watched from his car as the first team stepped onto the Harlow porch, and he could not make his legs move fast enough to beat their knock. Linda opened the door before they touched it, and for a heartbeat, everyone forgot their scripts. She stood as a mother stands when the state comes back too late, spine straight, hands clean grief, dressed in its Sunday best. The lead agent nodded and read words as if anyone in the doorway could hear them above the silence that had grown a face in this town. He said protective custody of evidence. He said urgent federal risk mitigation. He said temporary. He said thank you for your cooperation. Linda looked past him to Navarro, and the look said help, even if her mouth did not. Price stepped forward and spoke science in small sentences about acoustic exposure and the need for continuity of field data about the harm of breaking a series mid-sequence. The agent agreed that her expertise was valued and handed her a card that had a phone number and a name that would never answer. Two men entered and lifted the stereo as if it were an animal. The reels still turned, though no tape sat inside. One of the men's eyes flicked to the motion and away again as if he had met his own sleepwalking and didn't want to make it wake. Word traveled faster than the convoy could drive. By the time the team reached the school, parents had their children by the wrists, eyes full of questions they did not say out loud, because the air felt like a microphone. The pastor at the church stood at the steps with a hand on the rail and a voice that asked for patience gentle and raw at its edges. At the diner lot where asphalt remembered lost shoes and rain remembered old names, two old men in caps stood shoulder to shoulder and refused to move for a moment that lasted longer than it should have, then moved anyway because you can stand against weather, but not a machine. At the water plant, technicians in yellow jackets tried to explain which levers did what, and found themselves explaining the history of their fathers instead the way men do when the language they need is not the language they have. The team that went to the ridge did not find the gate locked. Navarro and Price had left it the way they had found it because locks on ghosts look foolish. The agents moved with that calm choreography that turns fear into inventory. They logged the collapsed tower ribs, photographed the concrete pads, scanned the air and the soil, and the shape of silence wrote that the site was inert, and then flinched as the sensor on a belt chirped once, like a cricket remembering summer. They cut the recorder from the echo box with a gloved hand and bagged it with a label that would devour its history. When they lifted the lid of the box, the pulse under their palms quickened, then settled like a breath that has decided to pretend it was never a gasp. At the motel, two polite agents knocked on Navarro's door with a warrant that said comprehensive seizure and a tone that said, "We will do this kindly while we do it completely." He let them in because barricades make headlines, and he had decided the story needed fewer of those. He pointed at the hard drives and the tapes and the notebooks and the USB with the reversed file still tucked like a tooth beneath his laptop. He watched each item become property of nobody. One agent opened his mouth to offer a speech about respect and procedure and the public good. Another agent glanced at the motel carpet with the empathy of someone who knows what stains are older than they look. Price stood at the window, arms folded, counting vans, turning the street into a ledger. When they were gone, the room looked bigger, and he felt smaller inside it, as if the evidence had been keeping the walls warm. It took less than a day for the town to split along a line that had not existed the day before. On one side were the ones who wanted the signal to be named mapped, understood a thing you could put on a chart until it stopped being a ghost. On the other were those who wanted the ground to be ground again, and the radios to be radios, and the forest to be old and stupid the way forests are supposed to be. At the grocery, a clerk told a customer to stop playing the new uploads on speaker near the bread because the baguettes had started to crack themselves in their wrappers as if sound could dry them. At the bar, men who had worked at the mill before it died argued about whether North Edge had ever paid anyone under the table and whether the state would ever admit it if it had. On Main Street, a teenager with a skateboard and bravado filmed himself standing on the old diner's slab at midnight, posted it, then deleted it because the comments looked like prayer. The Bureau set up a command post at the old Civic Center, where the ceiling smells like varnish and youth basketball. They put Price on a panel and gave her a badge that changed nothing about the way she thought. They asked if there was any evidence that the signal could be controlled. She said control was not the word she would use. They asked if the sequence hidden in the episode could be decoded. She said it already had been by anyone who had ears. They asked about risk to infrastructure, and she told them to ask about risk to memory, because that was where she had seen the harm first and worst. Then they asked if the source could be silenced. She said try telling a river to be less wet. Mara returned to town because leaving had not made the ringing go away. She stood in the doorway of the motel room and said, "I brought you something," and then did not move because the act of bringing had unstitched a seam she had held tight for 20 years. She set a shoebox on the table, and inside it lay things that had not belonged together until the day Emma vanished: a Polaroid of the two girls laughing with wet hair by the river, a school ID cracked across the middle, a cassette labeled in Emma's hand with a date and one word, red. Mara said we started using colors when we ran out of names. Red meant it hurt to stand near. She said she had kept the tape in a coffee tin in a freezer because water and cold both have a way of forgiving time. Navarro played it, and the room changed shape. The tone was not louder than the ones they had known, but it was clearer, as if the microphone had been inside the machine's thought. Emma's voice reached across years and said, "I know you're there," as if she were not asking, but asserting. The tape ended with a clatter that sounded like a recorder hitting a shoe, and then a breath that was not hers. A slow, deliberate inhale right beside the mic, too calm to belong to fear. He told Mara about the coordinates folded into the pauses of episode 13, and she didn't ask how because the answer would have been a map of obsessions. He told her the pattern drew a net across the region, and that releasing the points would be like drawing lightning rods on a storm. She said he could publish, and people would go and someone would die, or he could hide them, and someone would go anyway, and maybe more would die because ignorance is a magnet too. He wanted her to tell him what the decent choice was. She said decency was a door you put on your own house, not a rule. The weather follows. That night, with the town quiet in the way hospitals are quiet, he opened the file again. The pauses ticked like a metronome, and he marked them converted lengths into numbers and numbers into coordinates. Laid the dots on a satellite image until the screen looked like constellations had fallen into Oregon and stuck. He saw the ridge. He knew the tower ribcage, the water plant, the school. And he saw places he had never stepped: a slumped warehouse near a dead lumber yard where trucks had not idled in a decade, a stretch of coastal bluff where a listening station had once measured storms, a cemetery edge where stone would ring if you asked it right, a culvert that fed under the interstate like a throat. He sorted them by strength, by proximity to the river, by the way his stomach tightened. Each dot was a choice, and his hand hovered above the publish button, as if the cursor could smell fear. Price sat opposite him with a pencil and no paper, tapping a rhythm that didn't quite match the room's hum. She said if he posted, they would come for him with something worse than warrants, and if he didn't, the thing uncoiling under the soil would find its own way to teach people where it lived. He asked her if science had a word for when a system learns to speak without needing a speaker. She said yes, and told him a term that tasted like electricity and sorrow. He told her he was going to buy time, and she nodded as if time were a currency you could counterfeit if you had good hands. He composed a file that was not a map but a story. The way a fairy tale is a road sign. He wrote about the river, about hollow places, about humming machines that loved symmetry, about staying out of long, narrow rooms that could teach your heart a new beat. He wrote like a man squeezing a message into a bottle with a tide schedule taped to its neck. He posted it where the true crime forums fed and the hobbyist radio boards grazed, and he did it under a name that was not his and under a timestamp that did not exist because he sent it to a friend who knew how to make posts arrive late or early depending on what you needed them to do. The point was to scatter caution without pointing at a place you could mark with a pin. He did not sleep. He drove the town in loops like a shepherd with no sheep, but a wolf that had decided to purr. He parked by the Civic Center as the Bureau held a meeting with a smiling title and a scared mouth, and went inside because his badge could still open doors here even if his case could not. A liaison with a suit that fit too well asked him to make a statement for unity and calm. He said calm was not coming and unity did not survive audits. The liaison said the situation would deteriorate if irresponsible actors continued to provoke. He wanted to say the ground itself was the actor, and their responsibility had expired, but he did not. He watched a slide deck with bullet points that made the signal sound like a tax, and he looked at faces in hoodies and hats and Sunday blouses, and thought how weirdly tender crowds look when they are tired. On the way out, he found Linda by the doorway with her coat in her hands and the expression of someone who has decided to keep breathing on purpose. She asked him what to do if the voice came back in the night. He wanted to tell her to unplug everything, to put pillows against vents, to line window panes with towels like a storm was coming. He told her to listen once and then speak her daughter's name and then turn off the light and let the house be quiet, because quiet has muscles too, and sometimes it wins. She smiled with one side of her mouth the side life had not been able to bully, and said she would try. She asked if he was going to stop them from taking Emma's tapes out of town. He said he could not, and she nodded like someone who had known that answer for a long time. Somewhere between midnight and morning, the new upload arrived. No title, no cover, just a file that the feed accepted because habit is the laziest gatekeeper. He pressed play and heard nothing for a full minute. Then, the faintest of knocks to a pause. 3, the same rhythm Emma had used when she came home late to tell her mother that she was herself. He stared at the wall as if walls could reply. The knocks repeated, then another sound, a pencil on paper, a soft scratch. Price slid into a chair and closed her eyes to listen harder. The scratch resolved into numbers, slow, patient, a counting of something that wasn't seconds. He wrote them as they came and saw they were not counts, but differences of path. At the end of the file, a breath landed in the room like a moth, and then a whisper. Not Emma's. Not the anonymous woman. A voice younger and rougher that he knew only because obsession can make you intimate with strangers. Caleb somewhere between boy and man, saying it's not theirs anymore. Then the file ended and he understood what had woken him into this life in the first place. The sense that some messages are bridges and some are knives and some are both. By dawn, the Bureau had everything they wanted and nothing they needed. They had the tapes and the hardware and the tower rib and the echo box and the motel room copy of the hard drive. And still the hum touched the soles of shoes and the undersides of tables, and sometimes the soft tissue behind the eyes. They called for a perimeter around the ridge and a media strategy for the town and an interagency consult that would last until the next election. Navarro stood at the diner lot where the asphalt kept the memory of last night's mist, and he realized the decision he'd been circling had not changed while he was running. He could publish the coordinates hidden in the episode and watch people draw lines to the dots and see a picture they could mistake for a solution. Or he could let the net remain invisible and watch the thing beneath it keep tugging until the whole region rang like a bell you can't hold still. Price came to stand next to him and said, "Sometimes you don't disarm a field, you detune it." He said, "How?" She said, "With others. Distributed listening instead of centralized fear." Enough small, honest ears pointed at the ground at once might keep it from finding a single throat to borrow. He looked at the town and saw houses that had learned to sleep with the radio off, a church that had stopped ringing its bell to hear if the sky would do it for them, a bridge that had decided to be just a bridge again. He pulled out his phone and typed a message he never thought he would type to people he had never wanted to owe. He asked for help in making a quiet loud enough to be heard. When he hit send, he knew the coordinates would stay where they were for now, folded inside pauses and carried on the backs of hints. He knew others would crack them and some would go anyway, because there is a kind of bravery that is just hunger in better clothes. He knew the Bureau would come for him if his name showed up attached to any of it. He knew he would accept whatever arrived with the clean knowledge that he had not mistaken noise for truth or fear for duty. He turned the key in the ignition and breathed as the engine answered him with a sound that belonged to him alone. In the rear view, the town's lights held steady, stubborn little stars that refused instruction. Ahead, the road rose into a gray that was already learning to be morning. The hum was there, at the edge of the feeling a tide that had decided to go out slow. He drove toward the ridge, toward the box, toward the next choice, the way people do when they have decided to live in a story long enough to finish it. The town learned the shape of quiet the way a body learns the shape of grief, slowly, painfully, with muscles it didn't know it had. Navarro drove the grid before dawn. Windows cracked, engine low, letting the air itself be the instrument. The hum was there, faint as a held breath, no longer bullying, no longer filling rooms like floodwater. It felt tuned, not tamed. A metronome turned to a heartbeat. Price said it would not last by accident. A thing that could cross soil and steel, and human thought would try again, because persistence is what separates weather from will. If they wanted the town to survive, they would have to answer in a way that did not look like fear. He stood on the diner's slab with the old light poles shivering themselves steady, and called 5 people he trusted and 5 people he didn't but needed anyway. He told them what Price had told him: distributed listening could hold a field the way a net holds a wave. Not to cancel it, not to feed it, to weather it. Small, honest ears, synchrony restraint, no speakers, no uploads, no stunts. Tin cups on fences would do more good than 1,000 views if the cups were hung in the right places. He said the word volunteers, and the town heard neighbors, and came. By mid-morning, the Civic Center had turned into a quiet factory. Women who knew how to tune pianos by memory sat with pliers and thread and made wind chimes from copper pipe and fishing line cut to lengths Price marked on tape with a carpenter's pencil. A high school teacher raided the physics closet for tuning forks and left a note that said, "Bill me later," with a smiley face she didn't mean but needed. Old men ran wire like veins between fence posts, clipped piezo sensors onto guardrails, laid pennies along windowsills, and listened for which ones rattled. Teenagers biked the ridgelines with handheld recorders set to record silence, the way you set a camera to catch an eclipse. The church basement gave out coffee without the sermon. The bar gave out sandwiches without the tab. Someone printed flyers that said, "Turn off, tune in," and spelled in like in, and then crossed it out and laughed, because laughter was a good tone to set. The Bureau did not try to stop any of it. It watched like weather watches boats. A liaison with a face built for funerals asked Price if this distributed listening nonsense had precedent. She said everything worth surviving does. He asked for models, and she drew none, only circles with arrows that meant humans. Navarro took Linda home and helped her put the stereo back on the mantel because taking it had made nothing better. He set the reels in a bowl, like fruit, and ran an extension cord only as far as her hand could reach so she could unplug the whole thing without standing. He asked her if Emma's voice had come back. She said yes and no. Yes at the edge of sleep. No in the way grief sometimes lies and says it will behave. He told her about the net, about the chimes and the forks and the barbed wire, suddenly promoted to science about the town making a quiet sturdy enough to hold the next wave. She touched his sleeve like someone thanking a paramedic outside a burned house, and asked what she could do that would not make it worse. He asked her to stand on her porch at dusk and speak her daughter's name once plain, without pleading, and then close the door, and then let the house be a house. She said she could. At noon, a new upload landed in the feed, and everyone flinched. No title, no art, only a gray progress bar moving at the speed of dread. Navarro opened it in a sandbox on a machine with speakers that had died in 2009. The waveform looked like a river that had learned to braid. He didn't press play. He sent it to Price, and she didn't either. She charted it. The pauses spelled the same net as the last one, but with 2 new knots glowing faint at the map's edge, one at the coastal bluff, where the old listening station had measured storms, one along a culvert mouth under the interstate, where graffiti curled like smoke. She circled them. She said the field was recruiting old bones. She said if someone went there and played this, the grid would listen and learn and grow. He thought of teenagers and dares and phones that never stayed off, and felt an old terror he used to save for hospital waiting rooms. He and Price split the map between them. She took the bluff with a pair of grad students who had already turned fear into curiosity, and back again twice since breakfast. He took the culvert with Mara because she had already put too much of her life into this, not to stand where something might finally be asked to stop. On the way, Mara stared out the window and counted under her breath. He asked what. She said the minutes since Emma disappeared, a habit she had broken, and then picked up last week because someone had to keep the clock honest. He told her clocks lie when you beg them, and she said she knew and kept counting anyway. The culvert was a mouth cut into the hill concrete, stained with iron tears, water murmuring within like a rumor it couldn't stop telling. The interstate above them hummed with trucks and wind, 2 machines speaking in parallel. The hum beneath them answered deeper, older, the way a cello answers a mosquito. A kid had tagged the concrete with a crown and a curse. A second crown had been added below it and circled twice in paint the color of warning tape. Navarro stepped into the shadow and the temperature fell as if the world had been waiting to exhale. He placed a tuning fork on the lip and struck it lightly with the rubber heel of his hand. The note rang pure, then leaned sideways as if the air were a drunk friend. The culvert answered one universe lower. He set the fork down and it kept trembling longer than it should. He looked at Mara. She nodded toward the darkness. Go as far as you can still see the day. Don't take the recorder in. If it hears itself hearing that far in, it will mistake our listening for permission. They went in 2 lengths, then 3. The water never rose higher than his mid-calf, but it felt deeper, an old trick of sound. The culvert bent, and they stopped at the bend, because the day was a thumbnail behind them, and the concrete swallowed everything ahead. He pulled the small coin sensor from his pocket and set it against the wall. Numbers climbed and then flattened as if a ceiling had been found. He spoke a single syllable once and let it go. The syllable went forward, came back, thinner, went sideways, came back wrong. Not echo. Translation. He stepped out. The air felt heavier outside than in because outside carried choices and inside had offered command. Mara stood with her hands in her jacket pockets as if holding something that could break. I was the first anonymous upload, she said before he asked, because you were always going to. The voice that said, tell her story on the sticky note in the Salem station was mine. Caleb gave me the old loop. I brought the rain. He built everything else. And Emma brought the part that made it matter. He told her he had suspected, then stopped suspecting because suspicion cements people into statues, and he needed her to move. She said she would move now. She would go to Linda after sunset and sit at the kitchen table and, if asked, tell the truth. And if Linda told her to leave, she would leave. He said that was right. He did not say he was afraid for her. He did not say he was afraid of what anyone in this story might do when the next wave hit. Price called from the bluff. Wind roared through the line and turned her voice to a banner. The station's bones were still standing, she said, a ring of concrete, and the sea throwing itself at the rocks like practice. The sensors showed the same heartbeat he had found under the ridge, faint and insistently there. She had set 3 chimes at lengths that should not sing together and watched them almost do it anyway. The grad students were laughing because fear sometimes wears that mask when no other fits. She said the upload carried a new subharmonic hidden like a blade under the music. She said she could draw it. She said if they were lucky, it would say what it wanted, without needing anyone to give it a mouth. Navarro drove back to town with the window down and the heater on and felt like a man trying to balance a fracture with warmth and cold. The Bureau had turned the Civic Center stage into a dais and the dais into a promise. A deputy assistant director with a voice made of polished wood explained that the situation was stable and the department was coordinating with partners to ensure infrastructure safety and community resilience. A child coughed in the back row. An old woman said the Our Father under her breath and messed up the middle and apologized out loud for it and made 3 people smile. He sat on the floor by the door and looked at the soles of shoes and tried to read mood like weather. Tired, brave, suspicious. Grateful and angry in the same breath. The deputy said rumors and disinformation could increase stress responses. Navarro wanted to say, so could facts and so could silence, and the trick was not to pretend otherwise. He left before the applause could make liars of anyone. He checked the chimes on Main. They swayed without sound because the air had decided not to pluck them. He checked the pipe lengths by the mill bridge. They didn't vibrate, and this not vibrating felt like virtue. He drove past the school and saw the custodian sitting on the steps with a broom across his knees like a rifle he didn't want to fire. He lifted a hand. The custodian lifted the broom. Truce. At sunset, the sky turned the color of pennies. The town balanced itself on porches and in doorways and at kitchen tables, holding the kind of quiet that requires work. Linda stood with her hands on the railing and looked at the street where her daughter had walked and said, Emma, Once, the way Navarro had asked plain and without pleading, as if she were telling a clerk the right spelling for a name that mattered. The house listened. The stereo did not wake. A picture frame tilted on the mantel, then righted itself. In the culvert, the water kept moving as if it had never heard of human ceremony. On the bluff, the sea pulled its ropes, and the old station kept its secrets, and the chimes argued in whispers. In the motel, the computer with the sandboxed audio waited like a dog that would sit for anyone. In the Civic Center, a liaison updated a slide with a number that meant nothing without a story. In a car on a road that would be fog in an hour, Navarro let his head fall back against the seat and closed his eyes. The wave arrived with more politeness than the last. Not a punch. A doorbell. First one pulse, then two, then a longer one, like a human breath held to steady a hand. The tuning forks on the mill bridge trembled and then found each other and made a chord that tasted like iron and relief. The copper chimes on Main glanced, stopped, glanced again, then settled as if the air had smiled and backed away. The coin on Linda's windowsill clicked once and held. The culvert's mouth inhaled and exhaled, and the water wrote its own story on the concrete in a shine that looked like script. The bluff turned the wave, and the wave turned obediently because the sea has manners older than government. The Bureau's sensors lit in orange instead of red. Price's laptop drew a waveform that looked like a ribbon instead of a blade. She laughed and did not apologize for it. Mara's phone buzzed, and she did not answer because Linda was telling her about the time Emma came home from work with a burn on her wrist from a coffee pot, and cried because she couldn't play piano for a week, and then laughed because she could sing instead. Navarro stepped out of the car and stood in the middle of the empty diner lot. He spoke aloud because it felt like both superstition and devotion. "We hear you. That's enough." The air agreed, not by going silent, but by becoming generous. The hum retreated to the edge of feeling where it belonged. Like the awareness of a river, when you live near one, you stop hearing until it changes color. He walked the slab past the rust marks where stools had once been bolted past the rectangle, where the grill had made the floor hot in winter. He stopped at the back, where the bench had once held a folded uniform, and a backpack zipped so carefully it should have been a warning. He touched the concrete and thought of Emma counting trucks of Caleb making a science out of guilt of Dune writing "Forgive me" on the back of a picture and not believing he could be. He thought of Mara in a lab teaching speakers to be quiet. He thought of Price making music out of math and asking a town to help. He thought of Linda on a porch saying a name like a vow. His phone chimed, a link with no sender again, no title. He tapped it and a player opened, and the progress bar moved without sound until the end, and then there it was, a knock 2, a pause 3, and then a voice that was not a ghost because ghosts ask to be excused, and this did not. Emma Steady, not cut and pasted, not spliced into obedience, saying, "I know you're there." Navarro closed his eyes, and for the first time since the bones were found, he did not feel like a thief when he listened. He felt like a neighbor. The file ended with a breath and a scrape, and a line of tone that did not belong to any machine. Price called and said the numbers had settled. The buoy off the coast had quieted. The inland monitoring station had logged a decline that looked like a system choosing rest. He asked her if that was a lull or a promise. She said both. He asked her if lullabies were invented by scared people. She said yes, and added that scared people invent a lot of the best things. He sat on the hood of the car and let the cold through his coat and looked at the town as it put back the pieces it could. The Civic Center lights flicked off one by one. The church bell stayed still. The school's flag clung to itself. A dog barked once and then remembered sleep. The river made its old argument under the mill bridge, and nobody took it personally. He drove to the ridge and parked by the gate with the sign that had learned to smile. He walked in with a flashlight he did not turn on. The echo box waited like a thing that had decided to be furniture. He put his palm on the metal. Warm, patient, unafraid. Behind him, feet on leaves. He turned and saw Linda in the beam of moon that the weather had allowed. She had walked farther than he would have let her, and she did not ask permission to stand where she needed to. She touched the box, then took her hand away, then touched it again. She said he used to believe in fixing things by hitting them. He said that worked for radios sometimes. She said not for daughters. He didn't answer. She said she wanted to ask a question, and then laughed, because asking questions had started all of it and saved all of it and hurt every inch in between. She leaned close to the box and said the way a mother says it when she is telling someone to come inside because the light has changed. It's late, Em. Come home if you can. If you can't, let the house sleep. The box didn't answer, but the hum in the trees moved a fraction to the left as if the forest had shifted weight to a quieter foot. Navarro kept his hand on the metal until his fingers ached. He thought about the coordinates folded inside the upload and found that he did not want to publish them tonight. He wanted to let the town's quiet be the map just for a few hours. He wanted the next decision to belong to morning. The rain began as mist again, then found itself then softened on purpose. The first drops hit his cheek like punctuation. He closed his eyes and let the sentence end where it should for once. Tomorrow would bring men with language and trucks and tidy conclusions and the kind of help that arrives with a receipt. Tomorrow would bring kids with phones who could not bear not to test the fence. Tomorrow would bring the next wave, because that is how fields work and also how stories do. Tonight brought a town that had remembered how to answer without being told what to say. He and Linda walked out by the path he had worn into the grass. He drove her home and she went inside and he sat in the car until the heat died and the windows fogged and the hum became the noise a tired heart makes when it forgives itself for not solving God. He started the engine and the sound belonged to him again. He turned the wheel and the headlights touched the memorial stone where the diner had been and made the engraving brighter for a second, and that was enough. He drove toward morning and the road agreed to carry him. The morning didn't arrive. It seeped in. A pale gray that made the town look like a faded photograph. Corners bent thumbprints in the sky. Navarro woke in the car with the engine off and the quiet pressed against the glass. He felt the hum before he heard it. A softness at the teeth. A fingertip on the inside of the ear. Not a threat, a reminder. He wiped the windshield with his sleeve and watched Main Street start to breathe. 2 trucks. A cyclist in a bright jacket. A woman with a dog that sniffed the gutter like it had a secret to reclaim. The net still held. The chimes on the poles tilted and stayed mute polite as churchgoers. The river made its old argument under the bridge, but it sounded like river again, not diagnosis. He checked his phone. A dozen messages. Price 3 missed calls. A text from Mara at 3:17 a.m. She slept. Another from an unknown number with no words, only a link and a timestamp in 2003, as if the sender had stolen a calendar. He didn't press it. Not yet. He drove to the Civic Center and parked where the pavement was cracked into hexagons like dried lake bed. Inside the bureau were coffee and fatigue, charts on easels, a map with dots that had stopped multiplying for a minute. The deputy assistant director tried a smile that almost worked and said the overnight profile was encouraging. He said external partners were prepared to deploy dampening assets. He said the situation was evolving toward a manageable risk posture. Navarro stared at the word manageable as if it could be arrested. Price stood at the back with her laptop open and her jaw tight. She had drawn a new line across the map with a pencil someone had lent her because she trusted graphite more than jargon. A faint arc linking the coastal bluff to the ridge to the culvert and out toward the river mouth, then bending to a point in the hills beyond town, a point no one had circled before. She tapped it. Residual node, she said soft so it didn't sound like a dare. Older than the rest. It's been sleeping under the others like a root. The deputy cleared his throat. We'll dispatch a team. Price didn't look at him. She looked at Navarro, and the look had the weight of a coin handed across a counter with a city's future stamped into it. He nodded. Of course they went. They didn't take the convoy. They took Navarro's car with the heater that sighed and the glove box that rattled when the road turned to washboard. Linda's house sat quiet when they passed. On the porch, a mug with steam like a prayer you whisper for yourself. Mara stood by the mailbox with a coat too thin and a spine too stiff. He slowed and she lifted a palm. It wasn't goodbye. It was permission. The sky was the color of paper, soaked and wrung out and laid flat. The hills took the road and unfolded it and then took it again. Pines, alder, the occasional cut where a logging road scarred the slope and forgot to heal. The node hid where old things hide in a place everyone had decided wasn't worth looking at anymore. A gravel pit gone to weeds, rusted machinery, a corrugated shed with its mouth open, tongue of concrete sticking out like a dare. Price stood still with the coin sensor in her palm and her eyes shut like a person listening at a door she already knows opens inward. The numbers climbed. The air cooled. The hum sorted itself into two strands, then braided, then pulled tight enough to put a notch in a thought. "It's here," she said, and it wasn't triumph. It was relief, complicated by dread. They stepped into the shed. Dust lifted and settled like reluctant birds. A ladder cut into a square of dark. Navarro went first. Metal, damp. The smell of iron and old paper. At the bottom, a room. Not a bunker like the Echo node. Smaller, workmanlike. A bench. A rack of cables like ivy. A box the size of a suitcase with a face of dials, and two words stenciled so lightly you had to want to see them. Echo, core. A handprint in dust on the lid. Fresh. Navarro's shoulders pulled in. He looked at Price. She shook her head. "Not mine." He palmed the lid and lifted. Inside coils and a wafer of black etched with the delicacy of veins. A microphone cradle. Empty. A cable snaked out from the side and vanished into a hole bored through rock. He followed it with the beam of his light. The cable disappeared into stone that had been persuaded to behave. The hum pressed closer. Warmth on the face. Cold at the back of the neck. He felt a word form in his head that he didn't want, so he let it pass. On the bench, a cassette, labeled in a careful, hopeful hand, ERH, home test. His throat clicked. Price exhaled like she'd been underwater for a count too long. He slid the tape into the deck built into the box, a slot no one had used in years that welcomed the rectangle like a habit. He didn't press play. He looked up as if someone above ground could tell him if this was blasphemy. Then he pressed it. Rain, but not the loop. Window-side rain. Then Emma Small in the speakers, younger than the last time her voice had found them. "Okay." A nervous laugh. "Okay, if this is dumb you can say it, but it worked in the woods and maybe it works here. Mom's gone to the store. I'm trying it in the kitchen because the tile carries sound and the fridge has that buzz I hate, and maybe that's good. Chair legs on linoleum. The clink of a glass." She breathed like she was teaching herself to. "If you can hear me, answer in the water." Silence that wasn't. The hum searching for a shape, a tap, 1, 2. The glass sang a thin note and settled. Emma again breathless. "There. See, Caleb. It likes harmonics in small spaces. You keep saying, 'I'm brave,' but I'm just nosy. Brave is for later." Another laugh. "Not long. If I don't make it to brave, tell Mom I knew I was supposed to." A cabinet door. A heartbeat against a microphone. "Please don't make me disappear." The tape ended in a scrape and an exhale that may have been the house itself. Navarro realized his hands were fists. He opened them, and the air stung. Price wiped her face with her sleeve like rain had found the room. The box's dials ticked in a rhythm that was not the hum, not the world. A local clock unwinding. Outside, the sky bruised a little more. "Someone brought this here," Price said. "Not in 2003. After. They wanted it found." She glanced at the cable disappearing into stone. "They left the throat open," Caleb Navarro asked. "Maybe? Or the one who handed him the keys." She crouched, traced the cable with fingertips she kept from shaking by deciding not to. "This is still connected. The field can borrow this room, our voices, our machines, or we can borrow it back." "How?" She looked up. "We answer. Carefully." He thought of the night at the ridge. The box that moved like an animal resettling its weight. The bird that had tried 3 notes and decided the sky belonged to it again. He thought of Linda on the porch, saying a name like a true thing. What do we say? Not much. Price reached into her bag and pulled out a tuning fork engraved with a number that looked like a small dojo for a digit to learn discipline. She struck it against her heel. The note entered the room and walked the walls. The hum leaned toward it like a plant to a window. She stopped it with her fingers. We anchor. We don't command. The coin sensor ticked in a way numbers aren't supposed to. The dials on the box turned a hair on their axles without help. Navarro put his palm on the metal, and the warmth felt like green light on skin. He thought about the coordinates folded into the episode sitting on his phone, how a publish could turn this room into a pilgrimage and a slaughterhouse at the same time. He thought about the town hanging quiet like fabric. He put his mouth close to the microphone cradle, even though it was empty. "We hear you," he said. "We're here." A tone lifted inside the room like steam. Not loud. True. It matched the tuning fork for a heartbeat, then settled into something human. Throats remember. From before music had names, the cable hummed. The rock gave back a fraction of itself. The shape in the air put its hand on his and did not squeeze. His phone buzzed. The unknown link again, insistent now, as if courtesy had an expiration date. He sent it to Price's laptop. She sandboxed it, stripped it, opened it without giving it a mouth. The waveform appeared on screen, a simple line that swelled and dipped like a road over hills. No intro, no rain. A knock. 2. Pause. 3. And then Emma uncut, no mask, no ghost. "If you found this, I made it home." The room let go of them for a second, and they fell into the sentence like people stepping from a train before it stops. "If I didn't, this is what home sounds like. It's the fridge and the wind through the dog door and mom humming wrong. It's the drain in the bathroom that never shuts up. It's the number you dial when you don't have the right number. It's the sound of someone in the next room pretending to be quieter than they are because they love you. If you keep listening to the woods, be careful. The woods listen back. Teach it manners." The file ended with a clink of glass and something like a kiss toward the mic that translated as static, because machines are cowards about tenderness. Price's mouth trembled without breaking. "She left us instructions," she said. "Not for the field. For us." Navarro nodded. He felt larger and smaller at once. The box's dials settled to a resting angle he wanted to call graceful. The hum shifted out of the room and rested in the hallway like a dog deciding to wait outside. They climbed into gray that had decided to become light after all. The shed breathed them out. The hills took them back like nothing had ever happened here. On the drive, neither of them spoke for a stretch that could have been a minute or the length of a life you finally stop apologizing for. At the edge of town, the Bureau's radios clicked politely at each other. A helicopter flirted with the idea of relevance and flew on. The school's flag tried the wind, and the wind said maybe later. They went to Linda's. The porch held 3 mugs now, one steaming, one empty, one holding a handful of tuning forks like wildflowers. Mara sat on the top step, elbows on knees, a student of breathing. Linda opened the door. The house carried a nervous joy the way homes do when they decide to forgive a wall for how it fell. Navarro told her about the room and the box and the tape, and Emma's voice saying home. Linda touched the doorframe like it was a forehead. She didn't ask for the file. She didn't have to. It would find her the way rain finds roofs. The deputy assistant director arrived without sirens and with a thin envelope. He looked at the forks and the mugs and the faces, and for a second, his training blinked and a human stood where a job usually did. "We're standing down the perimeter," he said, "reclassifying the sites, monitoring only. Community protocols remain in effect." He swallowed a phrase that wanted to be a threat and turned it into a courtesy. "We appreciate your cooperation." Price smiled in a way that didn't cost her anything and walked him to the gate. Navarro watched the man look at the town like a map that had learned to argue and then leave it to speak for itself. Evening came decidefully this time. Lamps found their wattage. The net hummed the way quilts must in the dark if you could hear them. The river forgot about diagnostics and concerned itself with distance. The chimes on Main tried a note that didn't travel and then decided to be decorations again. The culvert breathed like a sleeping animal that had learned not to dream over anyone. The bluff kept the sea honest, and the sea thanked it by doing its job. Navarro drove to the diner slab one last time because some endings have to be walked like fields. He stood at the back, where the bench had once held a folded uniform and a Polaroid that had outlived its subjects. He put his hand against concrete that remembered heat and rain and the souls of the curious and the penitent. He whispered the sentence he had borrowed from an anonymous voice that had turned out not to be a stranger after all. You can hide in the dark, but sound travels forever. The air said yes without words. His phone vibrated. A new file. No title. He didn't flinch. He pressed it, and the speaker gave him what it owed. No hum now. No blade in the waveform. Only a room. Then a chair moving. Then a mother's voice, soft and certain, not recorded by any machine. Not captured. Happening. Linda down the block at a table saying her daughter's name the way you set a glass down when it belongs there. He let it play, and it wasn't sorcery. It was a town being a town. He walked to the ridge. The gate smiled its peeled smile. The path knew his weight. The echo box sat with the patience of furniture. He put his palm on it and felt warmth that came from neither power nor friction, the kind that lives in objects when they have been forgiven a little. We're done, he said. For now. The box didn't answer. It didn't have to. A bird tried a note in the trees. Another answered with a worse note. The first tried again and found a better one. He drove back through streets that had learned themselves. Price called and didn't ask where he was. The buoy's quiet, she said. The inland station, too. He said good. She said for now. He said good anyway. Mara texted a picture of a kitchen table with 2 teacups and no ghosts. He sent a thumbs up because words were loud today. The deputy assistant director sent nothing, which was the first useful thing he'd done. Navarro parked by the river. He sat on the hood with his coat zipped to the throat and listened to an old argument that had never harmed anyone who didn't try to stop it. He opened the notes app where the coordinates waited like teeth. He selected all and watched the dots light his screen like dishonest stars. He held his thumb over the trash can and let his heart count to an arbitrary number that felt like faith. He deleted them. He backed up the deletion. He smiled because backups are a religion. He looked up at the dark and decided not to be anyone's prophet. He would be what the town needed, a neighbor who drove when things hummed wrong and left when they hummed right. On the way home, he passed the memorial stone, and the engraving caught the headlights and shone like the truth looks when it remembers its manners. He slowed, rolled down the window, let the air in. From a porch, Linda's laugh small, honest, unpaid. From the school, a janitor dragging a mop with the rhythm of someone who has decided tonight is just a floor. From the mill bridge, nothing special at all. Perfection. He parked, sat in the dark for a handful of breaths, went inside. The room held him the way rooms do when they have been taught patient and unafraid. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't check the feed. He set the recorder on the table like an old coin from a country that doesn't exist and turned off the light. Outside, the forest shifted its weight to the quieter foot. The net held like a story told right. The case file in a cabinet somewhere wore a solved stamp that meant only this bones named Mother heard town awake. The rest stayed what it had always been, not a riddle, not an answer, a signal, a reminder, a sentence still finishing itself in a language you learn by living. The rain finally did what rain does. It arrived without opinion. It filled the gutters. It found the river. It put its hands on the roofs and said sleep. And in Silver Falls they did. Not because the dark had been emptied, because the dark had been introduced and had learned a little of how to behave.